The sun hadn't been up more than an hour when Silas Drummond's men came for the house. Nelly heard them before she saw them. The creak of wagon wheels, the measured thud of boots on dry earth, voices kept deliberately low the way men talk when they're about to do something that tastes bad but pays well. She'd been sitting at her father's kitchen table since dawn, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the final notice that had come 3 days after they buried him. Final assessment, outstanding debt, property seizure authorized by county order. The paper might as well have been written in her father's blood. She didn't cry. She'd run out of tears somewhere between the funeral and the moment she'd finally understood what her father had been too proud to tell her, that for 3 years Silas Drummond had been slowly, methodically destroying them with contracts designed to fail and loans structured to compound. Her father had fought it with everything he had. He'd believed in fairness, in honest work, in the idea that a man's word and a solid handshake meant something. Drummond had believed in paperwork, and paperwork had won. The knock came hard and official. 3 sharp raps that said, "We don't need your permission." Nelly rose slowly, smoothing her skirt with hands that wanted to shake but wouldn't. Not yet. Not where anyone could see. She opened the door. Marshal Cobb stood there, hat in hand, looking everywhere except at her face. Behind him, 2 of Drummond's hired men flanked a wagon already loaded with her father's tools. And behind them, watching from his black buggy like a king surveying a conquest, sat Silas Drummond himself. "Miss Colton." Cobb's voice was thin, apologetic in that useless way that means a man knows he's doing wrong but plans to do it anyway. "I got the order here. You'll need to vacate the premises." "Vacate?" Nelly tasted the word. "That's a clean word for what this is, Marshal." Cobb flinched. "I'm sorry. I truly am. But the debt's legal. The seizure's legal. I got no choice." "You got a choice." Nelly's voice came out harder than she'd intended. "You're just not making it." One of Drummond's men, a thick-shouldered brute named Calhoun, snorted. "You want us to carry her out, Mr. Drummond? Or you figure she can walk on her own?" Drummond stepped down from the buggy with the careful precision of a man who never moves without purpose. He was slim, well-dressed, with the kind of face that looked reasonable in lamplight and cold in the sun. He'd made a fortune buying up failing ranches and consolidating water rights. In a drought state, water was currency. And Drummond was very, very rich. He looked at Nelly the way a man looks at livestock he's already decided not to purchase. "Miss Colton, I understand this is difficult." His tone was measured, almost kind. That made it worse. "But your father made choices, poor choices. The debt is substantial, and the land must answer for it. You have 30 minutes to gather personal effects. 1 bag." "My father didn't make poor choices," Nelly said quietly. "You made sure he couldn't make any other kind." Something flickered in Drummond's eyes. Not guilt, but irritation, like a man bothered by a fly. "Your father signed contracts he couldn't honor. I offered assistance. He refused. Pride is expensive, Miss Colton. You're learning that now." "Assistance." Nelly laughed, and it came out sharp enough to make Calhoun shift his weight. "You gave him loans at rates that would choke a bank. You waited until drought season to call them due. You bought up his suppliers and tripled his costs. Don't stand there and talk about pride when you engineered this from the start." Drummond's face didn't change. 30 minutes. After that, Marshal Cobb will remove you by force if necessary. He turned and walked back to his buggy, conversation over. Nelly stood in the doorway, breathing hard, feeling the weight of eyes on her from every direction. The town had gathered, not to help, never to help, but to watch. Mrs. Henderson from the general store, the Farley brothers who worked the feed mill, Agnes Plum, who ran the boarding house and had always smiled at Nelly in church, Reverend Michaels, who'd spoken so beautifully at her father's funeral about grace and mercy. Not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. They just watched. And Nelly understood something in that moment that changed her forever. Most people don't choose evil. They just choose convenience. And right now, it was more convenient to let Silas Drummond do what he wanted than to risk standing in his way. She went back inside. The house felt enormous and empty. Her father's coat still hung by the door. His reading glasses sat on the mantel. The chair where he'd taught her to read the almanac, to calculate feed costs, to understand the business of running land. Empty now, and it would stay empty because Drummond's men were already dismantling the barn outside. Nelly moved through the room slowly, touching things she couldn't take. Her mother's china, the table her grandfather had built, the iron stove that had cooked 10,000 meals. In the end, she took what she could carry: a change of clothes, her father's Bible, a small bag of cornmeal and dried beans she'd been saving, the silver comb her mother had worn on her wedding day. She wrapped it all in a flour sack and tied it closed. Then she walked outside. The crowd had grown. 60, maybe 70 people now, standing in clusters, pretending they'd just happened by. Drummond was still in his buggy, checking his pocket watch like a man with better places to be. Calhoun grinned when he saw her bag. "That all you're taking? Guess you travel light." "Guess I don't have much choice." Nelly met his eyes. "You feel good about this, Calhoun? Throwing a woman out of her home so a rich man can get richer?" The grin faltered. "I just work for— Oh, I know who you work for." Nelly turned to face Drummond directly, raising her voice so the whole street could hear. "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Drummond. You're a thief in a clean suit. You steal with paper instead of guns, but it's still stealing, and every person standing here watching knows it." The crowd stirred. A few people looked away. Drummond's expression finally changed. His eyes went flat and cold. "You're hysterical with grief, Miss Colton. Understandable, but unfortunate. Marshal Cobb, escort her off the property." Cobb moved forward, hand extended like he might actually grab her arm. Nelly stepped back. "Don't." "Miss Colton," I said don't. Her voice cracked, but not with weakness, with fury. "I'll walk. I don't need you to put your hands on me so you can sleep tonight pretending you were just following orders." She turned and started walking. Not toward the wagon, not toward the town. Out. Away. Toward the road that led west out of Red Rock, toward open country and the ranches beyond. Behind her, someone in the crowd whispered, "Where's she going?" Someone else. "Got no family, no money. Poor thing." Poor thing. Nelly kept walking. The sun climbed higher and the heat came with it. That dry, pressing Colorado heat that bakes the sense out of a person and turns the ground to iron. Nelly's boots kicked up dust with every step. The flour sack hung heavy on her shoulder. Sweat soaked through her dress before she'd covered half a mile. She didn't look back. Looking back would mean she was expecting someone to follow, someone to call her name, someone to say, "Wait, this isn't right, come back." No one was coming. The first mile was anger. She walked fast, jaw clenched, replaying every moment of the last 3 years, every time Drummond had smiled and called her father friend, every time the bank had delayed the loan extension, every time a supplier had suddenly and mysteriously run short on feed. She'd seen it happening. They both had. But her father had believed the law would protect them if they just kept doing the right thing. The law hadn't protected them. The law had helped Drummond steal. The second mile was grief. The anger burned out, and what came behind it was hollowness so deep she could barely breathe. Her father was gone. The house was gone. Everything he'd built, everything they'd been, erased. And she'd stood there and watched it happen, because what else could she do? Fight Calhoun? Shoot the marshal? Set fire to the house so Drummond couldn't have it? Those were the fantasies of someone who'd given up. Nelly hadn't given up. She just didn't know what she was walking toward yet. The third mile was doubt. Her legs were starting to hurt. The sun was vicious now, straight overhead, no shade anywhere. She'd finished the water in her canteen before she'd even noticed she was drinking it. The road stretched ahead, empty and shimmering with heat, and for the first time since she'd walked out of that house, Nelly felt the weight of exactly how alone she was. No money, no family, no prospects. A heavy-set woman past marrying age with nothing to offer but a strong back and a stubborn refusal to quit. She could hear the voices that had followed her all her life. Too big, too plain, too much. She'd spent 32 years being too much of everything except the things that mattered. Not pretty enough, not delicate enough, not the kind of woman men wrote poems about or fought duels over, just Nelly. Big, sturdy, practical Nelly, who could outwork most men but would never be the kind of woman they wanted to come home to. And now, walking a dusty road toward nowhere, she had to decide if those voices were right. The fourth mile was the hardest. Her feet were blistering inside her boots. The flour sack felt like it was filled with stones. The heat made everything shimmer and warp, and twice she thought she saw water ahead, only to watch it dissolve into more empty road. Her breath came hard and shallow. Her vision started to narrow at the edges. And for just a moment, one long, terrible moment, Nelly thought about sitting down. Just sitting down in the dust and letting the sun do what it wanted. Wasn't that what everyone expected anyway? That she'd break? That she'd fail? That eventually the weight of everything would crush her down into nothing? Her knees actually started to bend, and then she heard her father's voice. Not a ghost, not magic, just memory, clear as glass. You're stronger than you think, Nelly girl. World's gonna try to tell you otherwise. Don't you believe it? She straightened, took a breath, took another step, and another. The 5th mile was survival. One foot in front of the other. Don't think about the heat. Don't think about the pain. Don't think about anything except the next step. Then the next. Then the next. She passed a marker stone. Hart Ranch. 2 miles. Hart Ranch. She'd heard the name before. Everyone in the county had. It belonged to a man named Gideon Hart, a widower who ran cattle and kept to himself. Reputation said he was hard but fair. Reputation also said he'd been different before his wife died. Warmer, quicker to laugh. After she passed, he'd closed up like a fist. Nelly had never met him, but she'd heard he ran a crew of 5 or 6 men, and men needed feeding. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was more than she'd had a mile ago. The 6th mile broke something loose inside her. The pain stopped registering as pain and became just a fact, like the sun or the dirt. She was beyond thirst now, beyond exhaustion. Her body was just something that moved because she told it to. When the ranch gates finally came into view, Nelly almost didn't believe they were real. 2 tall posts, weathered gray, with a crossbeam burned with the words Hart Ranch. Beyond them, a long drive led up to a main house, a barn, a bunkhouse, and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance. A windmill turned slowly against the sky. It looked solid, real, like a place built to last. Nelly stopped at the gate, swaying slightly, and tried to remember how to make her mouth work. A man came out of the barn, tall, lean, maybe 40, with dark hair going gray at the temples. He saw her and stopped, hand still on the barn door, taking her in, the dust-covered dress, the blistered hands, the flour sack hanging from one shoulder, the look in her eyes that said, I just walked through hell and I'm still standing. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at her like he was trying to figure out if she was dangerous or desperate or both. Finally, he spoke. You lost? No, sir. Nelly's voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper. She swallowed and tried again. I'm looking for work. The man, Gideon Hart had to be, studied her for another long moment. What kind of work? Cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing. You got references? No, sir. Experience? 32 years of keeping a house and feeding men who work hard. Gideon's eyes narrowed slightly. You come from Red Rock? Yes, sir. You're John Colton's daughter. It wasn't a question. News traveled fast, even out here. Nelly lifted her chin. I am. Heard what happened. Heard Drummond took your land. He did. Heard you told him off in front of half the town. I did that too. Something that might have been approval flickered across Gideon's face, but it was gone too fast to be sure. I got a cook. Nelly's heart sank. Had one anyway, Gideon continued. He quit last week. Said the work was too hard and the pay was too thin. Truth is, he couldn't cook worth a damn, and I was glad to see him go. Been making do with hardtack and whatever Luther can scrape together, but the men are starting to complain. Hope stirred, faint and fragile. I can cook, Nelly said. Give me a kitchen and an hour. I'll prove it. Gideon looked at her for a long time, long enough that Nelly started to feel the heat again, the exhaustion, the way her legs were shaking with the effort of staying upright. Then he stepped back and gestured toward the house. Kitchens through the side door, pantries stocked. You got 40 minutes before the crew comes in for supper. You feed them something worth eating, we'll talk terms. Nelly nodded once, sharp and sure, and started walking. Her legs almost gave out on the porch steps, but she caught herself on the railing and kept moving. The kitchen was worse than she'd expected. Dishes piled in the basin, flour scattered across the counter, a frying pan with something black and crusted in the bottom sitting on a cold stove. The whole room had the sour, neglected smell of a place nobody cared about. Nelly set down her flour sack, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. First, fire. She cleaned out the stove, set kindling, and lit it with steady hands. While it heated, she pumped water and started scrubbing dishes. Then she took stock of the pantry: flour, lard, salt, baking powder, dried beans, a few strips of salted pork, half a crate of potatoes, some tired-looking carrots. Not much, but enough. She worked fast, hands moving through familiar motions, mixing, kneading, chopping. Her father had taught her to cook the summer after her mother died. Food's the first language, he'd said. Feed someone honest and they'll hear you, even if they don't want to. 20 minutes in, she had biscuit dough resting and beans simmering with pork and onions. 30 minutes, the biscuits were in the oven, and she was frying potatoes with the last of the carrots. 35 minutes, she'd made gravy from the pork drippings. At 40 minutes exactly, she heard boots on the porch. The door opened and 4 men filed in, dusty and tired, talking low among themselves. They stopped when they saw her. "Who are you?" The youngest one, couldn't be more than 19, stared at her like she'd materialized out of smoke. "The new cook," Nelly said. "Sit." They sat. Gideon came in last, moving to the head of the table without a word. Nelly brought the food out: beans, biscuits, fried potatoes, gravy, and set it down in the center. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the youngest one, Tommy, she'd learn later, reached for a biscuit, split it open, and took a bite. His eyes went wide. "Holy—" He caught himself. "Ma'am, this is really good." The others followed. One by one, they filled their plates and started eating, and the room went quiet except for the sound of forks on plates and the occasional grunt of approval. Nelly stood by the stove watching, barely breathing. Gideon ate slowly, methodically, his face unreadable. He finished his plate, set down his fork, and looked at her. "You got a place to stay tonight?" "No, sir." "You got money?" "No, sir." He nodded once, like that settled something. Room off the kitchen used to be storage. You can clear it out, make it yours. Pays $30 a month plus room and board. You cook 3 meals a day, keep the house clean, and don't cause trouble. You steal from me, you're gone. You lie to me, you're gone. You put the crew at risk with bad food or carelessness, you're gone. Understood? Nelly's throat tightened. Understood. Good. Get yourself settled. Breakfast's at 5. He stood and walked out, the crew following. Tommy lingered at the door, grinning. "Welcome to Hart Ranch, ma'am. That was the best meal I've had since I left home." Then he was gone too. Nelly stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by empty plates and the lingering smell of warm bread, and finally, let herself feel it. Relief, not safety. Not yet. But the first fragile possibility of it. She'd walked 7 miles through hell, and she'd made it to the other side. For tonight, that was enough. The room off the kitchen was small, dusty, and filled with crates of old tools and preserved goods that probably hadn't been touched in years. But it had a window, a narrow bed frame, and a door that closed. Nelly spent the next hour clearing space by lamplight, her body moving on fumes and determination. She swept, wiped down the bed frame, and made it up with a thin mattress and blankets she found in a linen closet. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She sat on the edge of the bed, finally still, and felt every mile she'd walked settle into her bones. Her feet throbbed, her shoulders ached. Her hands were raw from scrubbing and kneading, but she was inside. She had a job, she had a door that locked, and tomorrow morning she'd get up before dawn and prove to Gideon Hart and every man on this ranch that she was exactly what they needed, even if they didn't know it yet. Nelly lay back on the narrow bed and closed her eyes. For the first time since her father died, she slept without dreaming. The rooster hadn't even started crowing when Nelly's eyes opened in the dark. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed was wrong, the walls were wrong, the smell was wrong. Then it all came back: the walk, the kitchen, the empty plates, Gideon's flat assessment of terms and conditions. She was at Hart Ranch now, and she had a job to keep. She dressed quickly in the dark, splashed cold water on her face from the basin, and braided her hair back tight. Her feet were still tender, blisters raw and angry, but she'd walked on worse. She pulled on her boots, wincing, and headed into the kitchen. The house was silent except for the creak of old wood settling and the tick of a clock somewhere in the front room. Nelly lit the lamps, stoked the fire in the stove, and got to work. By the time the first gray light started filtering through the windows, she had coffee boiling, bacon sizzling, and flapjacks stacked on a warmer. The kitchen smelled like work and comfort, the kind of smell that could pull a man out of sleep faster than any alarm. She heard movement upstairs. Boots on wood. Low voices. The crew started filing in just before 5. Luther first, a man somewhere past 50 with silver stubble and eyes that had seen too much. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "Morning," Nelly said. "Morning, ma'am." Luther moved to the table slowly, like he wasn't sure if this was real or if he'd wake up to find it was just another day of hardtack and regret. Tommy came next, grinning before he even made it through the door. "Smells like heaven in here." "Smells like bacon," Nelly corrected. "Sit down before it gets cold." A stocky man with a thick mustache came in third, nodding at her but saying nothing. And then a fourth man appeared, shorter, wiry, with suspicious eyes and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He looked at Nelly like she was a problem he hadn't figured out yet. "You the one who cooked last night?" he asked. "I am." He sat down without another word. Gideon came in last, moving to the head of the table like it was muscle memory. He glanced at the food, then at Nelly, then back at the food. "Coffee's ready," Nelly said, already pouring. She served them in silence, watching the way they ate. Luther, with the careful appreciation of someone who'd gone hungry before. Tommy, with the enthusiasm of youth, the mustached man with quiet efficiency, and the suspicious one, Pete, she'd learn, like he was searching for something to criticize and coming up short. Gideon ate without expression, but she noticed he took 3 flapjacks instead of 2. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the sounds of eating like a blade. "Luther, I need you to check the fence line on the north pasture. Tommy, you're with him. Marcus, take the new stock to the upper grazing land and make sure they've got access to the creek. Pete, we need to talk about those supply orders you put in last week." "What about them?" Pete's tone had an edge. "They're wrong. You ordered 50 pounds of grain when we need 500. Either you can't count or you're not paying attention." "Which is it?" Pete's jaw tightened. "Must have been a mistake on the—" "No." Gideon's voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the room dropped. "Don't blame the supplier. You wrote the order. You signed it. That means it's yours. Fix it today or I'll find someone who can." Pete's face flushed, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." Gideon stood, draining his coffee in one long swallow. "Good breakfast, Miss Colton. Keep it up." Then he was gone, and the rest of the crew followed, Tommy pausing long enough to flash her another grateful smile. The kitchen went quiet. Nelly stood alone among the dirty dishes and the fading warmth of the stove, and felt something settle in her chest. Not pride exactly, more like confirmation. She'd proven herself once. Now she had to do it again. And again. Every single day until it stopped being a test and started being trust. She rolled up her sleeves and started washing dishes. The days fell into a rhythm that was brutal and simple. Up before dawn, coffee and breakfast for 5 men who worked hard enough to eat like 7. Clean the kitchen, scrub the floors, shake out the rugs, wash the linens. Midday dinner, something that would stick to their ribs and fuel the afternoon. Afternoon was for bread baking, mending, preserving whatever produce Marcus brought in from the garden nobody had tended properly in months. Evening supper, more dishes, prepare for the next morning. Collapse into bed and do it all again. It should have been exhausting. It was exhausting. But it was also the first time in months that Nelly's hands had purpose that didn't involve watching her father die or packing up a life that no longer existed. By the end of the first week, Tommy had started lingering after meals, helping her carry water or chop wood without being asked. Luther occasionally nodded his approval when a meal was particularly good, which from him was equivalent to a standing ovation. Even Marcus, the quiet one with the mustache, had started saying, "Thank you, ma'am," when he finished eating. Pete still watched her like she was a snake that might bite, and Gideon remained unreadable. He spoke to her only when necessary, his tone always professional, always distant. He never complimented the food beyond that first "keep it up." He never asked how she was settling in. He just expected competence and offered nothing in return except a roof and wages she hadn't seen yet because the first month wasn't up. Nelly told herself that was fine. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to survive. But late at night, lying in her small room listening to the house creak and settle, she couldn't help wondering what kind of man Gideon Hart actually was beneath the hard exterior. The crew respected him, that much was obvious. But there was something else too. A carefulness in how they moved around him, like they were navigating around a wound that hadn't healed. It was Luther who finally told her. 2 weeks in, she was in the garden, pulling weeds from the potato rows when Luther came around the side of the house, moving slow like his back was bothering him. "Need help?" he asked. Wouldn't say no to it. He knelt down beside her with a grunt, and for a while they worked in silence, the kind of comfortable quiet that comes from two people who understand that talking isn't always necessary. Then Luther said, "You're doing good here." "Thank you. Better than good, truth be told. Ain't seen the house this clean since—" He stopped. "Since when?" Luther pulled a weed, examined its roots, tossed it aside. "Since Mrs. Hart was alive." Nelly's hands stilled. "I heard he was a widower. Didn't know much else. Most folks don't. Gideon don't talk about it." Luther sat back on his heels, wiping his forehead. "She died 3 years ago. Fever took her fast. 1 week she was fine, the next she was gone. Gideon was, well, he wasn't the same after. I wouldn't expect him to be." "No, I mean, he changed. Before Sarah died, this place was different, warmer. Gideon smiled more, laughed easier. He had plans, wanted to expand the herd, build a bigger house, maybe start a family. Sarah was the heart of everything here, and when she went, she took something out of him that never came back." Nelly looked toward the house, seeing it differently now. 3 years is a long time to grieve. Grief don't have a clock, ma'am. Some folks recover. Some folks just don't. Luther pulled another weed. He tried, in his way. Kept the ranch running, kept the crew employed. But the heart went out of it. Meals got simpler. House got quieter. He stopped talking about the future like it was something worth planning for. "What about the crew? They stay?" "Most of us. Tommy came on after Sarah died. Pete's been here about a year. Marcus and I been here since the beginning, watched Gideon and Sarah build this place from nothing." Luther's voice got softer. "She used to cook breakfast every morning, you know. Said a man couldn't work right on an empty stomach. You remind me of her a little. Not in looks. She was small, red hair, freckles everywhere. But in the way you move through the kitchen, like it's yours. Is that a problem?" "No, ma'am. I think it's exactly what this place needs." Luther stood, wincing as his knees cracked. "Just thought you should know what you're walking into. Gideon's a good man, but he's been half alive for 3 years. Don't take it personal if he keeps his distance. He's just protecting what's left." That night at supper, Nelly watched Gideon more carefully. Noticed the way he sat in his chair like it was duty, not comfort. The way he ate with mechanical efficiency, tasting nothing. The way his eyes went distant sometimes, like he was seeing something nobody else could. She'd seen that look before. In her father's eyes. The last few months before he died. The look of a man who'd already lost everything and was just going through the motions until the inevitable finally caught up. After the crew left, Nelly cleared the table and found herself staring at Gideon's empty chair. Sarah's chair would have been at the other end, facing him, close enough to talk, far enough to give him room. A partnership built on proximity and patience. Now that chair sat empty, gathering dust. Nelly turned away and washed the dishes. The 3rd week brought the first real test. She was kneading bread dough when Pete walked into the kitchen in the middle of the afternoon, tracking mud across the floor she'd scrubbed that morning. "Need something?" Nelly asked, not looking up. "Came to talk." Pete leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You settling in all right?" "Well enough?" "Good. That's good." He picked at a splinter in the wood. "Can I ask you something?" "You're gonna anyway." Pete's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile, might have been irritation. "Fair enough. Why'd you really come here?" Nelly stopped kneading. "You saw what happened in Red Rock. I needed work." "Yeah, but why here? You could have gone to any ranch in the county. Hell, you could have gone to a town, found work in a boarding house or a restaurant. Why Hart Ranch specifically?" "It was close. It's 7 miles from Red Rock. That ain't close." Pete pushed off the counter. "See, here's what I think. I think you came here because you heard Gideon's a widower. I think you're looking for more than just a job. Nellie's hands went still. She looked at Pete directly, and her voice came out cold. You think I walked 7 miles in killing heat to trap a grieving man into marriage? I think women do what they need to survive, and a widow with a ranch is a lot better prospect than a cook with nothing. You're right, Nellie's voice stayed level. Women do what they need to survive. Right now, I need this job. I need a place to sleep and food to eat and wages I can save. That's it. I'm not here to catch a husband. I'm here because this was the first place that didn't slam the door in my face. So you say. So I know. Nellie went back to kneading, harder now. You want to doubt me, Pete? Fine. Watch me. Watch how I work. Watch how I act around Gideon. But don't you dare stand in my kitchen with mud on my clean floor and accuse me of being the kind of woman who preys on grief. I've had enough people tell me what I am. I don't need it from you too. Pete was quiet for a long moment. Then, Luther likes you. Luther's a good judge of character. Tommy thinks you're an angel sent from heaven. Tommy's 19 and easily impressed by flapjacks. Marcus don't trust easy, but he trusts you. And you? Nellie met his eyes. What do you think? Pete studied her, and something shifted in his expression. I think you got fire in you. Question is whether you're going to use it to warm this place up or burn it down. Guess you'll find out. Pete nodded once and walked out, tracking more mud as he went. Nellie stared at the dirty floor, jaw clenched, hands shaking with anger she couldn't quite name. Not at Pete, or not just at Pete. At the assumption that a woman alone must be scheming, that survival required manipulation, that she couldn't just want to work, to be useful, to build something without it meaning she was trying to steal someone else's life. She grabbed the mop and scrubbed the floor twice as hard as necessary. That evening, Tommy noticed she was quiet during supper. You all right, Miss Nellie? He asked when the others had filed out. She told him not to call her that, but it had stuck anyway. Fine, Tommy. You sure you seem... I said I'm fine. Tommy backed off, hands raised. Yes, ma'am. Just, if you need anything, you let me know, all right? You've been real good to us. Want to return the favor. After he left, Nellie sat in the quiet kitchen and let herself feel the weight of the last 3 weeks. The exhaustion, the uncertainty, the constant awareness that she was one mistake away from being back on that road with nowhere to go. She'd proven she could cook. She'd proven she could work. But she hadn't proven she belonged. Not yet. The shift came gradual, like seasons changing. By the 4th week, the kitchen stopped feeling like borrowed space and started feeling like territory. Nellie rearranged the pantry for better efficiency. She replaced the cracked dishes with a set she found in storage. She hung herbs to dry from the ceiling beams and started a sourdough starter on the windowsill. Small claims, small victories. The crew responded in kind. Marcus started bringing her vegetables from the garden without being asked. Luther fixed the loose handle on the cast iron skillet she'd been struggling with. Even Pete thawed slightly. He still watched her, but the hostility had shifted into something closer to grudging respect. Tommy was a different story. One evening after supper, he stayed behind while the others headed to the bunkhouse. Miss Nellie? His voice was soft, uncertain. Can I ask you something? Of course. He twisted his hat in his hands. That cake you made last night, the molasses one. What about it? My mama used to make that. Exact same way, with the cinnamon and the raisins and everything. His eyes were bright, not quite crying, but close. How'd you know? Nellie's chest tightened. I didn't know, honey. Just made what I know how to make. It tasted just like hers. Tommy's voice cracked. She died 2 years ago. I ain't had that cake since. Didn't think I ever would again. Nellie moved around the table and did something she hadn't done since her father died. She reached out and squeezed someone's shoulder, just once, brief and warm. I'll make it again, she said. Whenever you want. Tommy nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and left quickly. Nellie stood in the empty kitchen, feeling the ache of it. She'd fed Tommy's body every day for a month. But tonight she'd fed something deeper. That was what food could do, when it was made with care instead of obligation. It could bring people back to moments they thought were lost forever. The real turning point came during the 5th week, and it started with Gideon's ledger. Nellie was cleaning the front room, a space she usually avoided because it felt too much like invading Gideon's privacy, when she noticed the account book open on his desk. She shouldn't have looked. It wasn't her business. But the numbers were wrong. She could see it from across the room. Columns that didn't add up, entries that duplicated, expenses that didn't match the supplies she'd seen coming through the ranch. Nelly hesitated. Then she moved closer. The ledger was a mess. Not because Gideon couldn't do arithmetic, the calculations were correct, but because someone had been recording false numbers. Supplies marked as delivered that never arrived. Costs inflated by 10 or 15% across multiple entries. Small enough that it wouldn't catch attention immediately, but consistent enough that over months it would add up to serious money. Nelly's stomach dropped. She knew this trick. She'd watched Drummond do it to her father for 3 years. Something I can help you with? Nelly spun around. Gideon stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. I'm sorry. I was cleaning and I saw... She stopped, started over. Your ledger's wrong. Excuse me? The numbers, someone's been recording false expenses. She pointed at the open page. Look here. You've got 50 pounds of grain listed at $3, but the going rate is $2.50. And here, 20 yards of fencing wire at $4, but that's almost double what it should cost. Small overcharges, spread across months. Easy to miss unless you're looking for it. Gideon moved to the desk, scanning the entries she'd indicated. His jaw tightened. How do you know this? Because I watched it happen to my father. Nelly's voice was steady. Drummond used inflated costs and false deliveries to drive up debt, made it look legitimate on paper while bleeding him dry. This isn't as sophisticated, but it's the same principle. Who's been managing the accounts? Nelly didn't answer. She didn't need to. Gideon's eyes went cold. Pete. I don't know that for sure. I do. Gideon closed the ledger with controlled precision. He handles the supply orders and records the expenses. I've been too busy managing everything else to double-check his work. He looked at Nelly, really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. If you're right about this, I owe you more than a month's wages. I'm right. Then I need to have a conversation with Pete, tonight. Mr. Hart, Nelly hesitated. If Pete's been stealing, you should let the law handle it. The law? Gideon's laugh was sharp and humorless. The same law that helped Drummond steal your land? No, thank you. I'll handle this my way. He walked out before Nelly could respond. She stood alone in the front room, heart pounding, wondering if she'd just made things better or catastrophically worse. The confrontation happened after supper, and Nelly heard it from the kitchen. Gideon's voice, hard and controlled. Sit down, Pete. We need to talk about the ledger. Pete's reply, wary. What about it? About how you've been stealing from me for the last 6 months. Silence. Then Pete's voice, defensive. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't. The single word cracked like a whip. I went through every entry you've made since you started managing accounts. Inflated costs, false deliveries, duplicate charges. You've taken close to $300. That's a lie. It's documented, in your handwriting. Do you want to keep lying, or do you want to tell me why? Another silence, longer this time. When Pete finally spoke, his voice had changed, smaller, shakier. I needed the money. For what? Debts. I got into some trouble in my last job, borrowed money from the wrong people. They've been squeezing me for repayment. I thought I could take a little here and there, just enough to keep them off my back and you'd never notice. You thought wrong. I know I did. Mr. Hart, I'm sorry. I'll pay it back, every cent, I swear. With what money? You don't have $300. If you did, you wouldn't have been stealing in the first place. Pete's voice cracked. So what are you going to do, turn me in? Have me arrested? Gideon was quiet for a long time. Then, no. No? You're going to work it off. Every dollar, plus interest. I'm docking your wages by half until the debt's cleared. You'll also be reassigned from supply management to general labor. Luther will handle the accounts from now on. You step out of line even once, try anything remotely dishonest, and I won't call the law. I'll blacklist you from every ranch in this county. Understood? Yes, sir. Pete's voice was barely audible. Thank you. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Miss Colton. She's the one who caught it. The sound of a chair scraping. Boots on wood. Pete's voice, closer now. She told you? She did. Why? She could have used it against me. Could have gotten me fired and taken my position. Because she's not that kind of person. Gideon's voice softened slightly. You might want to remember that next time you accuse someone of scheming. Pete left without another word. Nelly stayed in the kitchen, pretending she'd been focused on dishes the entire time, but her hands were shaking. Gideon appeared in the doorway a moment later. You heard all that, he said. It wasn't a question. Hard not to. You did the right thing, telling me. I know. Gideon moved further into the kitchen, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he looked uncomfortable. Not angry, not distant, just uncertain, like he was trying to figure out something he didn't have words for. I misjudged you, he said finally. When you showed up here, I thought you were desperate. Thought you'd work for a few weeks and leave as soon as something better came along. I am desperate, Nelly said quietly, and there isn't anything better. Maybe, but you're also... He stopped, started again. This ranch has been limping for 3 years. I kept telling myself I was holding it together, but the truth is I was just going through the motions. The crew knew it. I knew it. We were all just existing. And now? Now the house smells like bread in the morning. Tommy's smiling again. Luther's back hurts less because someone's making him eat vegetables. Even Marcus is talking more, which for him is saying something. Gideon met her eyes. You did that. In 5 weeks, you brought life back into a place I thought was finished. Nelly's throat tightened. I just cooked some meals. No, you did more than that. He was quiet for a moment. Sarah used to say that a house isn't made of wood and nails. It's made of the people who care for it. I thought when she died, the house died too, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was just sleeping, waiting for someone to wake it up. He left before Nelly could respond. She stood alone in the kitchen, his words echoing in the silence, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not love, not yet, but the first dangerous stirring of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could build something here that was hers. Not stolen, not borrowed. Hers. The next morning, Pete was waiting outside the kitchen when she came in to start breakfast. Ma'am, he said, hat in his hands, can I talk to you? If it's quick, I've got biscuits to make. Pete looked at the ground. I wanted to apologize for what I said about you coming here to trap Gideon into marriage. That was wrong of me. Yes, it was. I was projecting. That's what my sister would say anyway. I've been burned before by people I trusted, and I figured everyone was like that. But you're not. You're just trying to survive, same as the rest of us. Nelly studied him. You could have lost everything last night. Why'd Gideon give you a second chance? Because he's a better man than I deserve. Pete finally looked up. And because you caught me before I stole enough to do real damage. So thank you for that. And I'm sorry. Apology accepted. Now get out of my kitchen so I can work. Pete almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. As he left, Nelly felt the last piece of tension she'd been carrying start to ease. The ranch wasn't perfect. The crew wasn't perfect. She sure as hell wasn't perfect. But maybe that was the point. Maybe home wasn't something you found ready-made. Maybe it was something you built, piece by piece, mistake by mistake, until one day you looked around and realized the broken people had learned how to hold each other up. By the end of the 6th week, something had shifted in the way Gideon looked at her. Not romantic, not yet, but aware. Like he'd finally stopped seeing her as just the cook, and started seeing her as a person who'd chosen to stay when she could have left, who'd cared for his crew when she didn't have to, who'd protected his ranch from theft when it would have been easier to stay silent. One evening, after the crew had gone to the bunkhouse, Gideon lingered in the kitchen doorway. Coffee's still hot if you want some, Nelly said without looking up from the pot she was scrubbing. Thank you. He poured himself a cup and sat at the table, not in his usual spot at the head, but off to the side, like he was visiting instead of commanding. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Gideon said, "How's your father's land looking?" Nelly's hands stilled. "Don't know. Haven't been back. Drummond's put it up for lease. Heard he's charging triple what it's worth." Sounds like him? You could contest it, get a lawyer, fight the seizure. With what money? Nelly turned to face him. Fighting costs more than losing. My father proved that. Gideon nodded slowly. Still, doesn't seem right. Lots of things aren't right. Doesn't make them less true. He was quiet for another long moment, then, You ever think about what comes next? Next? After here, after this job. You planning to move on eventually? Find something permanent? Nelly set down the pot she'd been scrubbing and dried her hands carefully. This is permanent, unless you're planning to fire me. No, that's not... Gideon rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. I just meant, you're young. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Working as a ranch cook isn't what? Good enough? Nelly's voice came out sharper than she'd intended. I'm 32 years old, Mr. Hart. I'm not young. I'm not looking for adventure or romance or some better opportunity. I'm looking for a place where I can work hard, earn my keep, and sleep at night without wondering where I'll be tomorrow. If that's not good enough for you, it's good enough. Gideon's voice was firm. More than good enough. I just want to make sure you know you've got options. That's all. Nelly softened slightly. I appreciate that. But right now, this is the best option I've got. So unless you're asking me to leave, I'm not. Then I'm staying. Gideon nodded, finished his coffee, and stood. Good night, Miss Colton. Good night. After he left, Nelly stood in the quiet kitchen and let herself admit something she'd been avoiding for weeks. She didn't just want to stay at Hart Ranch. She wanted it to be home, and that scared her more than anything Drummond had ever done. Because wanting something meant you could lose it, and Nelly had already lost enough. The trouble started on a Friday morning in late September when a line of riders appeared on the eastern ridge just after dawn. Nelly saw them from the kitchen window while she was rolling out pie crust. 5 men on horseback, moving slow and deliberate, silhouetted against the rising sun like something out of a bad omen. She wiped flour from her hands and stepped onto the porch, squinting against the light. Luther came out of the barn, stopped, and followed her gaze. His face went hard. That's Drummond's crew, he said. Nelly's stomach dropped. You sure? I'm sure. Front rider's Calhoun. I'd recognize that bastard anywhere. Luther turned and shouted toward the bunkhouse. Gideon, we got company. By the time the riders reached the main yard, everyone was outside. Gideon stood at the center, arms crossed, face unreadable. Luther flanked his right, Tommy his left. Marcus and Pete hung back near the barn, hands resting casual on their belts but ready to move. And Nelly stayed on the porch, halfway between the house and the confrontation, close enough to hear but far enough to avoid being told to go inside. Calhoun dismounted first, grinning like he'd just been invited to a party. Behind him, 3 hired men Nelly didn't recognize, and trailing at the back, sitting tall in his saddle like a man surveying property he already owned, Silas Drummond. He looked exactly the same as he had the day he'd stolen her home. Clean suit, cold eyes, that air of absolute certainty that the world would bend to his will because it always had before. Morning, Hart? Drummond's voice was pleasant, conversational. Beautiful day. State your business, Drummond. Gideon's tone made it clear there would be no small talk. Business. Always straight to the point with you, isn't it? Drummond dismounted slowly, deliberately, taking his time. I'm here on behalf of the County Water Commission. We're conducting routine surveys of creek access and usage rights throughout the valley, making sure everything's properly documented. My water rights are documented, have been for 15 years. Oh, I'm sure they are, but documentation from 15 years ago doesn't necessarily reflect current regulations. Things change, laws evolve. We just want to make sure everyone's in compliance. Drummond smiled. Purely routine. Routine. Gideon's jaw tightened. And you need 5 men for a routine survey? Safety precaution. Never know what you'll find out in the territory. Drummond's eyes drifted past Gideon, scanning the ranch, and then landed on Nelly. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, calculation, and something uglier underneath. Well, Miss Colton, didn't expect to see you here. Nelly forced herself to stay still, to keep her voice level. Mr. Drummond, I heard you'd found employment. Didn't realize it was at Hart Ranch. His tone was light, almost friendly, which made it worse. Quite the step up from Red Rock. Good for you. Is there something you want, Drummond? Gideon stepped forward slightly, drawing attention back. Or are you just here to waste my morning? Drummond turned his attention back to Gideon, and the false warmth in his voice evaporated. I want to see your water rights documentation. All of it. Original deeds, surveys, usage agreements, and I'll need access to the creek to conduct measurements and take samples. You'll get nothing without a court order. I have one. Drummond pulled a folded paper from his jacket and held it out. Signed by Judge Harlan 2 days ago. You can read it if you'd like, but the summary is simple. I'm authorized to inspect all water sources on your property and review all related documentation. You interfere, you're in contempt. Gideon took the paper, scanned it, and his expression went cold. This says you're authorized to inspect. It doesn't say you're authorized to seize or restrict my access. Not yet. Drummond smiled again. But if we find discrepancies, and we usually do, the Commission has authority to suspend usage pending resolution. Could take months. Maybe longer. The threat was clear. Drummond wasn't here for a routine survey. He was here to manufacture a legal excuse to cut off Gideon's water supply, the same way he'd manufactured debt to steal Nelly's land. You won't find discrepancies, Gideon said. My rights are legitimate. I'm sure they are. But let's verify, shall we? Calhoun, get the surveying equipment. We'll start at the north access point and work our way downstream. You're not doing anything until I've spoken with my lawyer, Gideon said. By all means, speak to whoever you'd like, but the court order is valid, and we're proceeding today. You can cooperate or you can be cited for obstruction. Your choice. Calhoun and the other men started unloading equipment from the horses, measuring chains, stakes, what looked like collection bottles for water samples. They moved with the casual confidence of men who knew the law was on their side, at least on paper. Nelly watched from the porch, her mind racing. She knew this play. She'd seen it before. Drummond wouldn't find real discrepancies because there weren't any to find. But he didn't need real ones. He just needed paperwork complicated enough to tie Gideon up in legal battles while the ranch slowly bled resources. And if Gideon fought too hard, Drummond would pivot, claim interference, file complaints, maybe even manufacture evidence of water misuse or contamination. Small lies wrapped in official language, impossible to disprove without expensive lawyers and months of court time. By then, the ranch would be broken, just like her father's land. Something hot and sharp flared in Nelly's chest. Not fear, not anymore. Rage. She'd stood silent once while Drummond destroyed her family. She'd watched her father fight with honor and lose everything because Drummond had no honor to match. She would not watch it happen again. Nelly stepped off the porch and walked straight toward Drummond. Miss Colton, Gideon started, but she ignored him. She stopped 3 feet from Drummond, close enough to see the surprise flicker across his face, close enough that everyone in the yard could hear her clearly. You're lying, she said. Drummond's eyebrows rose. Excuse me? You heard me. This isn't a routine survey. This is the same thing you did to my father. You manufacture a legal pretense, drag someone into bureaucratic quicksand, and bleed them dry while they fight to prove they did nothing wrong. Miss Colton, I understand you're upset about your father's situation, but my father's situation. Nelly's voice shook, but not with weakness. With fury, barely contained. You mean the situation where you spent 3 years engineering his failure? Where you gave him loans designed to compound? Where you bought out his suppliers and tripled his costs? Where you waited until drought season to call debts due so he'd have no way to pay? Your father made poor business decisions. My father was an honest man destroyed by a dishonest one. Nelly took a step closer. And now you're doing it again. You don't want to survey this water. You want to control it. You're going to file reports claiming violations that don't exist, tie Mr. Hart up in legal proceedings, and force him to defend rights he already legitimately holds. And while he's fighting you in court, you'll be buying up surrounding properties and consolidating water access until he's left with nothing. The yard had gone silent. Calhoun had stopped unloading equipment. The crew stood frozen, watching. Drummond's face was still calm, but his eyes had gone cold. Those are serious accusations, Miss Colton. They're facts, and everyone here knows it. Do they? Drummond looked around the yard, addressing the crew directly. Do you all believe I'm some kind of villain, that I've come here to destroy an honest rancher for no reason other than greed? Nobody spoke. Drummond smiled. I thought not. Because unlike Miss Colton, you understand that business is business. Water rights are valuable, yes, but they must be properly regulated. If Mr. Hart's documentation is legitimate, he has nothing to worry about. And if it's not, Nelly pressed, if you find some technicality, some outdated filing, some minor discrepancy in 15-year-old paperwork, what then? You suspend his access, file for commission review, Drag it through courts while his cattle go thirsty and his land turns to dust. That's the plan, isn't it? I don't have to listen to this. Drummond turned to Gideon. Control your employee, Hart, or I'll add harassment to my report. She's not harassing you, Gideon said quietly. She's calling you out. Drummond's composure cracked slightly. I have a legal court order. And I'm getting a lawyer. Gideon's voice was steel. You want to inspect my water rights? Fine. But you'll do it with my legal representation present, and everything you find will be documented and witnessed. You try to manufacture evidence or file false reports, I'll sue you for malicious prosecution. Bold words from a man who can't afford to lose his water access. Bold words from a man who's got nothing left to lose. Gideon stepped forward, and his voice dropped to something dangerous. You think I don't know what you're doing? You think I'm stupid? I've watched you operate in this county for 5 years. You're a parasite dressed in fine clothes. And Miss Colton's right. You're running the same play you used on her father. But here's the difference. John Colton fought you alone. I've got witnesses, I've got resources, and I've got time. So bring your survey equipment, file your reports. But know this. You make one move that isn't completely legitimate, and I will bury you in countersuits. Bo? Mta. For the first time since he'd arrived, Drummond looked uncertain. He turned his attention back to Nelly, and his voice came out colder than before. You've made a mistake, Miss Colton. A very serious mistake. Slandering a respected businessman in front of witnesses. I didn't slander you, Nelly said. I told the truth. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I stand, it sounds like a bitter woman making wild accusations to justify her father's failures. My father didn't fail. You destroyed him. Your father was weak. Drummond's voice turned vicious. He borrowed money he couldn't repay, made promises he couldn't keep, and when reality caught up with him, he collapsed under the weight of his own incompetence. And now you're here, working as a cook, blaming me for your circumstances instead of accepting that some people simply aren't strong enough to survive. The words hung in the air like poison. Nelly felt them land, felt the old shame trying to rise up, the voice that had whispered all her life that maybe they were right, maybe she was too much, maybe she deserved everything that had happened. Then she thought about the 7-mile walk through killing heat, the kitchen she'd scrubbed until her hands bled, the crew she'd fed every morning for 2 months, the life she'd built from nothing, and the shame evaporated. You're right about one thing, Nelly said quietly. Some people aren't strong enough to survive, but I'm not one of them. I survived you once. I'll do it again. She turned to Gideon. I need to go to town. Get your lawyer. Make sure everything's documented properly before these men touch anything on this property. Gideon nodded once. Take the wagon. Tommy, go with her. Yes, sir. Nelly walked past Drummond without another glance, heading toward the barn. Behind her, she heard Drummond's voice, tight with barely controlled anger. This isn't over, Hart. No, Gideon agreed. It's not. The ride into town was tense and quiet. Tommy drove while Nelly sat beside him, watching the landscape roll past and trying to slow her racing heart. Miss Nelly? Tommy's voice was hesitant. That was real brave. What you did back there. Wasn't brave, was angry. Still, standing up to Drummond like that. He's powerful. He could make things real hard for you. He already made things hard for me. Can't get much worse. Tommy was quiet for a moment. Then, you think Mr. Hart's water rights are in danger? I think Drummond doesn't make moves like this unless he believes he can win. Nelly turned to look at Tommy. Question is whether he's planned it as carefully as he planned what he did to my father, or if he's overreaching. How do we find out? We get a lawyer who knows water law. We document everything, and we make sure Drummond can't manufacture evidence without getting caught. They reached Red Rock just before midday. The town looked the same as it had 2 months ago, same dusty streets, same cluster of buildings, same people moving through their lives with the deliberate indifference of those who'd learned not to get involved in other people's problems. Nelly felt their eyes on her the moment the wagon rolled down Main Street. Whispers followed them like flies. That's John Colton's daughter. Heard she's working at Hart Ranch now. Living there too, I heard. Living there? Ain't that... The whispers cut off as Nelly turned to look directly at the speaker. Mrs. Henderson from the general store, the same woman who'd watched in silence while Drummond stole Nelly's home. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed and she looked away quickly. Tommy pulled the wagon to a stop outside the office of George Whitmore, attorney at law. The building was small, tucked between the feed store and the boarding house, with a weathered sign and dusty windows that suggested Whitmore wasn't exactly prospering. But Luther had said he was honest, and right now, honest was more valuable than successful. Nelly climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the ride, and pushed through the door. The office was cramped and cluttered, paper stacked on every surface, law books crammed into sagging shelves, a desk buried under case files. Behind it sat a man in his 50s, thin and balding, with spectacles perched on his nose and ink stains on his fingers. He looked up when Nelly entered, squinting. "Help you?" "Mr. Whitmore. I'm Nelly Colton. I work for Gideon Hart at Hart Ranch. We need legal representation immediately." Whitmore set down his pen. "Immediately? What happened?" "Silas Drummond showed up this morning with a court order to survey our water rights. He's planning to manufacture violations and tie us up in legal proceedings while he consolidates control of the creek." Whitmore's expression sharpened. "That's a serious accusation." "It's what he did to my father. I watched him do it for 3 years." Nelly moved closer to the desk. "He uses legal paperwork as a weapon. Small discrepancies, outdated filings, technical violations that wouldn't matter to anyone except someone looking for an excuse. He buries people in bureaucracy until they can't afford to fight anymore." "And you think he's doing the same thing to Hart?" "I know he is." Whitmore studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. "Let me see this court order." "It's at the ranch." "Then we'd better get back there before Drummond starts planning evidence." They made it back to Hart Ranch by mid-afternoon to find the situation had escalated. Drummond's men had set up surveying equipment along the creek, taking measurements and filling collection bottles with water samples. Gideon stood watch with Marcus, his face tight with barely controlled fury, while Luther and Pete hovered near the main yard, ready to intervene if things turned violent. Drummond himself was examining a stack of documents Gideon had been forced to produce: original deeds, water rights agreements, usage records going back 15 years. Whitmore climbed down from the wagon and walked straight to Drummond. "George Whitmore, legal counsel for Mr. Hart. I'll be reviewing all proceedings from this point forward." Drummond barely glanced at him. "George, didn't know you were still practicing." "I am, and I'm documenting everything you do here today." "By all means, document away. Everything we're doing is completely legal." "We'll see about that." Whitmore moved to Gideon's side. "Show me the court order." While Whitmore reviewed the paperwork, Nelly walked down to where Calhoun was taking measurements near the creek. He saw her coming and grinned. "Well, if it ain't Miss Colton, come to watch us work?" "Come to make sure you're working honest." Calhoun's grin widened. "You calling me dishonest?" "I'm saying I know how Drummond operates, and I know men like you get paid to find problems whether they exist or not." "That's a hell of a thing to say." "It's the truth." Calhoun's expression darkened. "You got a real mouth on you, lady. Gonna get you in trouble one of these days." "Already in trouble. Can't get much worse." "Oh, it can always get worse." Calhoun leaned closer, voice dropping. "Word of advice. Drummond don't forget people who cross him. You made him look bad in front of witnesses this morning. He's gonna return the favor." "Let him try." "Your funeral." Calhoun turned back to his measurements, dismissing her. Nelly returned to the main yard to find Whitmore deep in conversation with Gideon, their voices low and serious. She caught fragments. Outdated filing system. Technically valid, but need to refile under current regulations. When they noticed her approach, Whitmore addressed her directly. "Miss Colton, I understand you have experience with Drummond's methods." "Unfortunately." "Then you understand what we're dealing with. The court order is legitimate. Judge Harlan's signature is real, and the Water Commission does have authority to conduct surveys. But the timing is suspicious, very suspicious. Drummond filed for this survey 2 weeks ago, immediately after your land seizure was finalized." "He's been planning this," Nelly said. "Appears so. The question is what he's actually hoping to find." Whitmore gestured to the documents spread across a makeshift table. "Mr. Hart's water rights are legitimate, but they were filed under regulations that have since been updated. Technically, he should have refiled when the new regulations took effect 5 years ago. It's a formality. His usage hasn't changed, and his access is grandfathered under the old system. But Drummond could argue that the failure to refile constitutes a violation. Would that hold up in court? Gideon asked. Maybe. Maybe not. But it would give Drummond grounds to request a suspension of access pending review, and that review could take months. Months we don't have, Gideon said. It's drought season. Cattle can't wait months for water. I know. Whitmore pushed his spectacles up his nose. Which is why we need to file the updated documentation immediately. Today, if possible, before Drummond can claim any violations. And if we file today, then his survey becomes meaningless. He can't claim violations that don't exist. Gideon looked at Nelly. You think he'll let it go that easy? No, Nelly said. He'll find something else. He always does. As if summoned by her words, Drummond approached from the creek, Calhoun at his side. His expression was carefully neutral, but there was something calculating in his eyes. Mr. Hart, Drummond said, we've completed our initial survey. I'll be filing a preliminary report with the Water Commission tomorrow. What report? Whitmore demanded. You haven't found any violations, haven't I? Drummond pulled a small notebook from his pocket and flipped it open. Inadequate documentation of usage rates. Failure to refile under current regulations. No record of environmental impact assessment. Possible contamination from livestock access too close to the water source. Several concerning discrepancies, actually. Those aren't discrepancies, Whitmore snapped. Those are administrative technicalities that don't affect legitimate usage rights. Perhaps, but they'll need to be addressed before the Commission can approve continued access. Drummond smiled. I'm sure it won't take long. 6 months, maybe 8. 8 months, Gideon repeated, his voice dangerous. You know I can't go 8 months without water access. Then I suggest you address the violations quickly. There are no violations. Gentlemen, a new voice cut through the tension. Everyone turned to see Agnes Plum climbing down from a small buggy that had just arrived. She was a solid woman in her 60s, gray hair pinned up neat, wearing a practical dress, and carrying herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades running a business in a hard town. She walked straight to Drummond. Mr. Drummond, fancy seeing you here. Mrs. Plum. Drummond's voice was carefully polite. This is official Water Commission business. I'm sure it is. I'm also sure you're conducting it in front of witnesses, which means it's public record. Agnes turned to Nelly. Miss Colton, good to see you looking well. Mrs. Plum, Nelly said, surprised. I didn't expect... I heard what happened this morning. Word travels fast. Agnes looked back at Drummond. I also heard you've been making accusations about Miss Colton's character, suggesting she's here at Hart Ranch for reasons other than honest work. Drummond's expression tightened. I've made no such accusations. Haven't you? Because 3 separate people told me you've been implying that Miss Colton and Mr. Hart are engaged in improper relations, that she's using her position to trap a widower into marriage. The yard went silent. I don't know what you've heard, Drummond said carefully, but I certainly haven't... Don't lie to me, Silas. Agnes's voice turned hard. I've known you for 15 years. You're many things, but you're not stupid. And spreading rumors about a woman's virtue is exactly the kind of thing you do when direct confrontation doesn't work. Mrs. Plum, I assure you, save it. Agnes turned to address the gathered crew. I've known Gideon Hart since he and Sarah first came to this territory. I watched them build this ranch from nothing. I watched Sarah die, and I watched Gideon survive it. And I'm telling you right now, there is nothing improper happening at Hart Ranch. Miss Colton is working an honest job, doing honest work, and anyone who suggests otherwise is lying. Thank you, Nelly said quietly. Agnes met her eyes. You stood up to Drummond this morning. That took courage. I should have stood up to him 2 months ago when he took your land. I didn't. I'm not making that mistake twice. She turned back to Drummond. You want to conduct surveys? File reports? Fine. But you spread one more lie about Miss Colton, and I'll make sure every respectable person in this county knows exactly what kind of man you are. Drummond's face was flushed now, anger breaking through his careful composure. You're interfering with official business. I'm defending someone's reputation. There's a difference. Agnes looked at Gideon. You need any help with lawyers or documentation, you let me know. I've got connections at the county office. Might be useful. Appreciated, Agnes, Gideon said. Drummond's jaw was tight. He looked at Whitmore, then at Gideon, then finally at Nelly, and his voice came out cold and controlled. The survey is complete. I'll be filing my report tomorrow morning. The Water Commission will be in touch regarding next steps. He turned to his men. Pack up. We're leaving. They worked quickly, loading equipment back onto horses, and within 10 minutes the entire crew was mounted and ready to go. Before he left, Drummond rode close to where Nelly stood and leaned down slightly. You've made this personal, he said quietly. That was a mistake. You made it personal when you destroyed my father, Nelly replied. I'm just returning the favor. Drummond's eyes went flat and cold. Then he wheeled his horse around and led his crew back toward the eastern ridge. They watched until the riders disappeared over the hill. Then Gideon let out a breath he'd been holding and turned to Whitmore. What do we do now? Now we file updated documentation immediately. I'll ride to the county office tonight, get everything properly recorded before Drummond can file his report. Then we prepare for legal proceedings. Whitmore looked grim. He's going to come after you hard, Gideon. This isn't just about water rights anymore. Miss Colton embarrassed him in front of witnesses. He's going to want revenge. Let him come, Gideon said. Easy to say, harder to survive. Whitmore turned to Agnes. You serious about those connections at the county office? Dead serious. Good, because we're going to need them. After Whitmore and Agnes left, the crew dispersed slowly. Luther to check on the cattle, Marcus to finish repairs on the barn, Pete and Tommy to handle evening chores. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red, and the ranch settled into the quiet rhythm of end-of-day work. Nelly stood in the yard, watching the horizon where Drummond had disappeared, and felt the weight of what she'd done settle over her. She'd made an enemy of the most powerful man in the county. She'd put Gideon's ranch at risk. She'd spoken truths that couldn't be taken back, and she'd do it all again. Gideon approached, his footsteps quiet on the packed earth. He stood beside her, following her gaze toward the distant ridge. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, I did. You made him your enemy. He was already my enemy. Now he just knows I'm not afraid of him. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then, you know he's going to retaliate. I know. Not just against the ranch, against you personally. I know that too. And you're not worried? Nelly turned to look at him. I'm terrified, but fear's not enough to make me silent anymore. I was silent when he destroyed my father. I watched it happen and I didn't fight back because I thought fighting would make it worse. Turns out silence doesn't protect you. It just makes you easier to destroy. Gideon studied her face, and something in his expression shifted. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone looking for rescue. Someone who'd hide when things got dangerous. I'm not hiding anymore. I can see that. Gideon's voice was quiet. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. Even though I just painted a target on your back? You didn't paint it. Drummond did. You just made it harder for him to aim. He started to turn away, then stopped. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Tomorrow's always difficult, Nelly said. That's just how life works. Gideon almost smiled. Fair enough. He walked back toward the house, and Nelly stayed in the yard, watching the last light fade from the sky. She'd stood her ground. She'd spoken truth, and now she'd have to live with the consequences. But as she headed inside to start preparing supper, she realized something had changed inside her. The woman who'd walked 7 miles through killing heat had been running from something. The woman standing here now was running toward it, and that made all the difference. Drummond's retaliation came faster than anyone expected, and it didn't come through legal channels. It came through whispers. 3 days after the confrontation at Hart Ranch, Nelly went into town to pick up supplies and found the atmosphere had changed. People who'd previously ignored her now stared openly. Conversation stopped when she walked past. Mrs. Henderson at the general store was coldly professional, her usual small talk replaced with clipped efficiency. Nelly loaded flour and sugar into crates while Mrs. Henderson tallied the bill in silence. Finally, unable to take the tension anymore, Nelly said, Something I should know about Mrs. Henderson? The older woman's hands stilled on the ledger. She looked up, her expression caught between discomfort and something harder. I don't involve myself in other people's business. That's what you said when Drummond took my land. Now you're looking at me like I committed a crime. So I'll ask again. What should I know? Mrs. Henderson's jaw tightened. There's been talk about you and Mr. Hart. What kind of talk? The kind I won't repeat in my store. Mrs. Henderson pushed the bill across the counter. That'll be $4.30. Nelly paid without another word and carried the supplies outside. Tommy was waiting with the wagon, and he took one look at her face and said, "That bad?" "Worse." Nelly climbed up beside him. "Let's go." They were halfway down Main Street when Nelly spotted two women standing outside the dress shop, watching them pass. One of them, young, blonde, wearing an expensive dress that screamed money, leaned close to her companion and whispered something. They both laughed. Tommy's hands tightened on the reins. "Don't listen to them, Miss Nelly." "Hard not to when they're making sure I hear it." When they got back to the ranch, Luther was waiting by the barn. His face was grim. "We got a problem," he said. Gideon came out of the house before Nelly could respond. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that comes with official county letterhead." Luther handed him an envelope. "Came by courier about an hour ago." Gideon opened it, scanned the contents, and his expression went dark. "It's a complaint, filed with the County Moral Standards Board." Moral Standards Board? Nelly felt ice spread through her chest. For what? For improper cohabitation and moral turpitude. Gideon's voice was flat, controlled. "Someone filed an official complaint claiming that you and I are engaged in improper relations, and that your presence at the ranch constitutes a moral hazard to the community." "That's insane." "That's Drummond." Gideon refolded the letter with precise, angry movements. "The complaint is anonymous, but it requests an official investigation into the living arrangements at Hart Ranch. If the board determines there's merit to the accusations, they can levy fines, restrict business operations, or recommend criminal charges." "Can they actually do that?" Tommy asked. "If they wanted to badly enough, yes." Luther's voice was heavy. "Moral standards laws are vague on purpose. Gives people like Drummond room to weaponize them." Nelly's mind was racing. "This is about Friday, about me standing up to him in front of witnesses. He couldn't beat us with water rights, so now he's trying to destroy my reputation instead. It's worse than that." Gideon handed her the letter. "Look at who filed it." Nelly read the signature line and felt her stomach drop. "Tom Garfield, County Assessor." "Same man who processed the paperwork for your father's land seizure," Luther said. "Same man who's been in Drummond's pocket for years." "So this isn't just gossip," Nelly said slowly. "This is an official legal attack. Welcome to how Drummond operates when he gets personal." Gideon's jaw was tight. "He couldn't scare you, so now he's going to humiliate you. Make you so toxic that staying here damages the ranch more than leaving. And if I leave? Then he wins. Again." Nelly stared at the letter, feeling the old shame trying to claw its way back up her throat. This was the place she'd been afraid of since the day she arrived. The whispered accusation that painted her as a schemer, a woman using her position to trap a widower, someone improper and unsuitable and fundamentally wrong. The kind of accusation that stuck to a woman forever. "I should leave," she said quietly, "before this damages you any further." "No!" Gideon's voice was sharp. "You're not leaving." "Gideon, you're not leaving," he repeated. "Drummond wants you gone because you're dangerous to him. You see through his tactics. You're not afraid to call him out. The moment you leave, he knows he can use the same strategy on anyone else who stands against him. But if you stay, we fight. Together." Gideon met her eyes. "I won't let him destroy you the way he destroyed your father, not on my watch." Something in Nelly's chest loosened and tightened at the same time. "You don't owe me that." "Maybe not, but I'm doing it anyway." Luther cleared his throat. "We need a strategy. Drummond's playing dirty, which means we need to get our hands dirty too." "How dirty?" Tommy asked. "Dirty enough to win." Luther looked at Gideon. "You still got connections with the territorial governor's office?" "Some." "Why?" "Because if we can prove Garfield filed a false complaint under Drummond's direction, we can flip this entire thing back on them. Corruption charges, abuse of office, harassment." Luther's eyes gleamed. "Make Drummond defend himself instead of attacking us." "That's a long shot," Gideon said. "It's the only shot we've got." The plan started taking shape over the next few days. And it required something Nelly hadn't expected. Going back into town. Not hiding, not running. Walking straight into the heart of the gossip and letting people see her with their own eyes. You want me to do what? Nelly stared at Gideon across the kitchen table like he'd lost his mind. I want you to go into town, publicly, visit the shops, talk to people, be visible. Gideon's voice was calm but firm. Right now, the only story people are hearing is Drummond's version. We need to give them a different version. By parading me around like I'm on trial? By showing them you're not hiding, that you have nothing to be ashamed of. Gideon leaned forward. Rumors thrive in absence. They die in sunlight. Right now, you're an idea, a scandalous woman doing scandalous things. If people actually see you, talk to you, watch you go about normal business, the story loses power. You're asking me to walk into a town full of people who think I'm a... Nelly stopped, her throat tight. I know what I'm asking, Gideon's voice softened. And I know it's not fair, but fair stopped mattering the moment Drummond filed that complaint. Right now, we're fighting for survival. And survival means making people see the truth instead of believing the lie. Nelly looked down at her hands, rough and scarred from months of kitchen work. What if they don't want to see the truth? Some won't, but some will. Agnes did, and if she's willing to stand with you, others might follow. Might. It's better than nothing. Nelly breathed out slowly. She'd walked 7 miles through killing heat. She'd stood up to Drummond in front of his own crew. She'd built a life from dust and determination. She could do this. Fine, she said. When do we start? Tomorrow. I'll come with you. No. Nelly's voice was firm. If you come with me, it looks like you're protecting me. Like I need defending. I go alone or I don't go at all. Gideon studied her face, and something like respect flickered in his expression. Alone it is. The next morning, Nelly dressed in her best clothes. A simple but clean dress, her mother's silver comb in her hair, boots polished until they gleamed. She looked at herself in the small mirror in her room and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, because she looked stronger. She rode into town alone, the wagon rattling over familiar roads, and tried not to think about the last time she'd made this journey. Newly homeless, humiliated, with nothing but a flour sack and fading hope. Now she had a job, a place to sleep, money saved, and she was about to risk all of it on the slim chance that people might choose truth over gossip. Red Rock was busy when she arrived, the street crowded with Saturday shoppers. Nelly tied up the wagon outside the general store and walked inside, head high, ignoring the way conversations faltered when people saw her. Mrs. Henderson looked up from behind the counter, surprise and discomfort warring on her face. Miss Colton? Morning, Mrs. Henderson. I need sugar, flour, and baking powder. Nelly's voice was steady, conversational. Also coffee, if you've got fresh stock. Mrs. Henderson hesitated, then moved to gather the supplies. While she worked, Nelly turned to address the 3 other customers in the store, 2 older women and a man she didn't recognize. Morning, Nelly said pleasantly. The women exchanged glances. The man nodded awkwardly and moved toward the door. One of the women, thin, sharp-featured, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Nelly made in 6 months, spoke up. You're the one working at Hart Ranch. I am. That must be interesting work. The implication was clear. Nelly kept her voice level. It's honest work. I cook, I clean, I keep house. Same as any woman keeping a household. But you're not keeping your own household, are you? The woman's smile was thin. You're keeping Gideon Hart's. I'm working for wages, same as the rest of the crew. Is that what they're calling it now? Nelly felt heat rise in her chest, but she forced it down. Anger was what they wanted. She gave them calm instead. Ma'am, I don't know what you've heard, but I'll tell you the truth straight. I'm a cook at a working ranch. I have my own room, I do my own work, and I earn my own money. If that's scandalous to you, I can't help that. But spreading lies about people you don't know, that's something you can help. The woman's face flushed. I'm not spreading lies. Then what are you spreading? The truth? Nelly met her eyes directly. Because the truth is I lost my father in my home, and I walked 7 miles in the heat to find work. The truth is, Gideon Hart gave me a job when no one else would. And the truth is there's nothing improper happening at Hart Ranch except honest labor and fair wages. If that's not the story you've been hearing, then someone's lying to you. Question is whether you care enough to find out who. The woman opened her mouth, closed it, and looked away. Mrs. Henderson set the supplies on the counter with a heavy thud. $6 even. Nelly paid, gathered her purchases, and walked out. The street felt like it was watching her. She forced herself to move naturally, stopping at the feed store to check prices, the post office to mail a letter Luther had asked her to send, the dress shop to look at fabric she couldn't afford but wanted anyway. At each stop, people stared. At each stop, she held her head high and acted like she belonged there. Because she did. By the time she made it back to the wagon, she was exhausted, not physically, but emotionally wrung out from the constant weight of eyes and judgment. She was loading the last crate when Agnes Plum appeared beside her. "That took courage," Agnes said quietly. "Didn't feel like courage. Felt like survival. Sometimes they're the same thing." Agnes helped her lift the crate into the wagon bed. "You're making enemies, child." "I know. But you're making allies too." Agnes glanced back toward the general store. "Sarah Mills, the woman who questioned you. She's married to one of Drummond's business partners. She was testing you, seeing if you'd break." "Did I pass?" "With flying colors." Agnes smiled slightly. "Word's going to spread that you stood your ground. Some folks will hate you for it, but others will respect you. That's how these things work." "And the complaint? The Moral Standards Board?" Agnes's expression darkened. "That's trickier. Garfield's dirty, but he's protected. We need proof of corruption, and Drummond's too smart to leave obvious evidence." "So what do? We find someone Drummond isn't protecting." Agnes lowered her voice. "Garfield has a clerk. Young man named Daniel Hayes. He handles most of the paperwork. If anyone knows where Drummond's fingerprints are on that complaint, it's him." "Will he talk?" "Not to me, not to Gideon, but he might talk to someone who understands what it's like to be crushed under Drummond's thumb." Agnes met Nelly's eyes. "He might talk to you." Nelly rode back to the ranch with her mind churning. By the time she pulled into the yard, she'd made her decision. Gideon was waiting on the porch, and he stood when he saw her. "How'd it go?" "About as well as expected. Got insulted, got stared at, got questioned." Nelly climbed down from the wagon. "Also got a lead. She told him about Daniel Hayes while they unloaded supplies." Gideon listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. "It's risky," he said when she finished. "If Hayes reports back to Garfield, then we're no worse off than we are now. We could be significantly worse off. Witness tampering, obstruction. I'm not tampering with anything. I'm just talking to someone." Nelly set down the last sack of flour. "Agnes is right. Hayes is the weak point. He's young, probably scared, and if he knows something that could clear us, we need to find out. And if he doesn't know anything, then we're back where we started." Nelly met his eyes. "But if he does know something and we don't try, we lose anyway." Gideon was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded. "Be careful." "Always am." That evening, after supper was finished and the crew had dispersed, Nelly found Pete lingering near the barn. He'd been quieter than usual over the past week, avoiding eye contact, working twice as hard as necessary like he was trying to prove something. "Pete," Nelly called, "got a minute?" He turned, surprise flickering across his face. "Ma'am?" "I need to ask you something." Nelly moved closer, keeping her voice low. "You used to work for Drummond, didn't you?" Pete's expression shuddered. "Briefly, a few years back. What made you leave?" "Got tired of lying." Pete's jaw tightened. "He wanted me to falsify inventory reports, make it look like his suppliers were shorting him so he could justify paying them less. I did it for a while. Then I couldn't stomach it anymore." "Did he threaten you?" "Didn't have to. I left before he could." Pete studied her face. "Why are you asking?" "Because I need to understand how he operates, how he controls people. He finds their weakness and squeezes." Pete's voice was bitter. "Money, reputation, fear, doesn't matter. He figures out what you care about and threatens to destroy it unless you cooperate." "What about Tom Garfield? What's his weakness?" Pete's eyes narrowed. "You're going after Garfield?" "I'm trying to understand who filed that complaint and why." "Garfield filed it because Drummond told him to. Same reason Garfield does anything." Pete hesitated, then added, But Garfield's got a problem. His son. Kid's got gambling debts, drinks too much, gets in trouble. Garfield's been covering for him for years. If that came out, if people knew the county assessor's been using his position to protect his no-good son, it'd end his career. Does Drummond know about this? Drummond knows everything. Pete looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, whatever you're planning, be careful. Garfield's a desperate man, and desperate men do dangerous things. Nelly nodded slowly. Thank you, Pete. For what? For being honest. Pete shifted his weight. I owed you that much. After what I said when you first got here, about you trapping Gideon. He looked down. I was wrong. You're not that kind of person. No, Nelly agreed. I'm not. She walked back to the house, her mind already planning the next move. The opportunity came 2 days later when Nelly made another trip into town, this time to deliver a message to Whitmore's office. She timed her arrival for late afternoon, when the county offices would be closing and clerks would be heading home. She waited outside the assessor's office, pretending to adjust the wagon harness, until she saw a young man exit, early 20s, thin, with nervous eyes and ink stains on his fingers. Daniel Hayes. Nelly approached carefully. Excuse me, are you Mr. Hayes? He stopped, startled. Yes, can I help you? I hope so. My name is Nelly Colton. I work at Hart Ranch, and Recognition flashed across his face, followed by fear. I can't talk to you. I'm not asking you to betray anyone. I just want to understand what's happening. I don't know what you're talking about. Hayes started walking, faster now. Nelly kept pace. The complaint filed against me and Mr. Hart, the one claiming moral impropriety. You processed that paperwork, didn't you? I process a lot of paperwork. This was different, because it wasn't a real complaint. It was manufactured. Nelly moved to block his path, forcing him to stop. I know because I've seen Silas Drummond manufacture legal problems before. He did it to my father for 3 years until there was nothing left to take. Now he's doing it to me. Hayes's face had gone pale. Miss Colton, please. I'm not trying to get you in trouble, Mr. Hayes. I'm trying to stop Drummond from destroying more lives. Nelly kept her voice gentle but firm. You're young. You probably took this job thinking you'd be helping people, doing honest administrative work. But somewhere along the way, you realized you were being used to hurt people instead. Am I wrong? Hayes looked down, his hands trembling slightly. You need to leave me alone. What's he got on you? Garfield, I mean. Or Drummond? Nelly pressed. Because men like them don't control people through loyalty. They control through leverage. What are they holding over you? Nothing. I don't... Hayes's voice cracked. I can't help you. Can't or won't. Both. He looked up and his eyes were desperate. Miss Colton, you seem like a decent person, so I'm going to give you some advice. Leave. Leave Hart Ranch. Leave the county. Go somewhere Drummond can't reach you. Because if you keep fighting him, you're going to lose. Everyone loses eventually. My father lost because he fought alone, Nelly said quietly. I'm not alone anymore. Doesn't matter. Drummond always wins. Not always. Just most of the time. Nelly held his gaze. But the only way he wins every time is if people like you keep helping him. If one person, just one, stands up and tells the truth, the whole thing falls apart. Hayes shook his head. I'm sorry, I can't. He walked away quickly, disappearing around the corner. Nelly stood in the empty street, frustration warring with understanding. Hayes was terrified. Whatever Drummond or Garfield held over him, it was enough to keep him silent. But fear only worked until it didn't. And Nelly had a feeling Hayes's fear was starting to crack. She just needed to find the right pressure point. The break came from an unexpected direction. 3 days after her conversation with Hayes, Pete appeared in the kitchen just before dawn, his face grim. We got a problem, he said. Nelly looked up from the biscuit dough she was kneading. What kind? The kind that involves Drummond showing up in town yesterday with Tom Garfield, both of them drinking at the saloon and talking loud enough for half the bar to hear. Talking about what? About how Garfield's going to make an example out of Hart Ranch, how he's got the Moral Standards Board ready to levy fines and possibly press criminal charges. Pete's jaw was tight. And how once the ranch's reputation is destroyed, Drummond's going to buy it for pennies on the dollar. Nelly's hands stilled. He said that? Out loud? Loud and drunk and confident. Pete leaned against the counter. But here's the thing. Someone else was listening too. Luther's cousin works at the saloon. He heard everything, and he's willing to testify if it comes to that. Testimony about bar talk won't hold up in court. No, but it'll give Whitmore ammunition. Proof that Drummond and Garfield are coordinating. Pete hesitated. There's more. After Drummond left, Garfield stayed, got drunker, started complaining about his son, about how the kid's debts are bleeding him dry, about how Drummond's been covering the payments in exchange for cooperation, Nelly finished. Exactly. Garfield's being blackmailed, basically. Drummond pays off the son's debts, and Garfield does whatever Drummond asks. That's leverage. Nelly's mind was racing. If we can prove that connection, we can flip Garfield, Pete finished. Make him understand that Drummond's going to throw him to the wolves the second he stops being useful. Would he believe that? Only one way to find out. Nelly found Gideon in the barn, checking on a mare that was due to foal soon. She told him what Pete had learned and watched his expression shift from cautious to calculating. This is what we needed, he said slowly. Proof of coordination, evidence of blackmail. If we can get Garfield to turn, we need someone he trusts to approach him, someone he won't immediately report to Drummond. They both turned to look at the main house, where through the window they could see Agnes Plum's buggy pulling into the yard. She'd come by every few days since the confrontation, bringing news from town and offering strategic advice. She was respected, connected, and most importantly, she wasn't afraid of Drummond. They met in the kitchen, spreading what they knew across the table like pieces of a puzzle. Agnes listened to everything, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When they finished, she sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. Tom Garfield's a weak man, she said finally, but he's not a stupid one. If we approach him directly, he'll panic, run to Drummond for protection. So how do we get to him? Gideon asked. Agnes's eyes glinted. We don't. We get to his son. His son's the problem, Nelly said. Exactly. Which means he's also the solution. Agnes leaned forward. Here's what I know. Garfield's son, Matthew, has been gambling at an establishment outside town, a place called the Silver Horse. Drummond's been paying his debts to keep him out of legal trouble. But what if those debts suddenly got called in anyway? How would that help us? Because it would prove to Garfield that Drummond's protection isn't guaranteed, that he's expendable. Agnes's voice was firm. I have connections at the Silver Horse. I can arrange for Matthew's debts to be called due immediately. When Garfield realizes Drummond isn't going to save his son, he'll understand he's on his own. And then he might be willing to cooperate, Whitmore said. Might, but it's the best chance we've got. Agnes stood. Give me 3 days. I'll make the arrangements. Those 3 days were the longest of Nelly's life. She went through the motions, cooking, cleaning, maintaining the facade of normalcy, while tension coiled tighter in her chest. Drummond's next move was coming. She could feel it, and when it came, everything would either break or hold. On the third evening, Agnes returned with news. It's done. Matthew Garfield just got a visit from the Silver Horse's collection man. His debts are due in full by the end of the week, or they're taking legal action. Criminal fraud charges, possibly jail time. How'd Garfield react? Gideon asked. He went straight to Drummond. Drummond told him to handle it himself, that he was done covering for incompetence. Agnes's smile was sharp. Garfield now understands exactly how disposable he is. Will he flip? That depends on who talks to him next. Agnes looked at Nelly. And I think it needs to be you. Me? Why? Because you're the one he hurt. And sometimes the only person who can convince someone to do the right thing is the person they wronged. Agnes's voice softened. Also because you understand what it's like to lose everything. Garfield's about to lose everything. His reputation, his position, possibly his freedom. You can speak to that in a way the rest of us can't. Nelly's throat tightened. What if he says no? Then we try something else. But I don't think he will. Agnes met her eyes. Men like Garfield don't want to be villains. They want to believe they're good people forced into bad situations. If you give him a way to be good again, to do the right thing, he might take it. The meeting happened 2 days later in Whitmore's office after dark. Garfield arrived looking haggard, his suit rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. He stopped when he saw Nelly. What is she doing here? Miss Colton has some things to say to you, Whitmore said, and I suggest you listen. Garfield started to turn toward the door, but Agnes blocked his path. Sit down, Tom. I don't have to. Yes, you do. Because right now, you're about to lose everything, and we're the only people offering you a way out. Garfield's shoulders slumped. He moved to the chair and sat heavily. Nelly took a breath and began. Mr. Garfield, I know you didn't want to file that complaint. I know Drummond forced you. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. And we both know why. Your son, his debts. Drummond's been covering them in exchange for your cooperation. Garfield's face went white. How did you? It doesn't matter how. What matters is that Drummond just cut you loose. Your son's debts are being called, and you're on your own. Nelly's voice was steady. And here's what's going to happen next. Drummond's going to let your son face criminal charges. You're going to try to cover for him using your position. Someone's going to notice. There'll be an investigation, and when they find evidence of corruption, and they will, you'll lose your job, your reputation, and possibly your freedom. Garfield's hands were shaking. What do you want from me? The truth. About the complaint. About Drummond's involvement. About how many other cases he's manipulated through your office. I can't. If I testify against Drummond, he'll destroy me. He's already destroying you, Nelly said quietly. He's just doing it slowly so you don't notice until it's too late. I watched him do the same thing to my father for 3 years. The manipulation, the false hope, the belief that if you just cooperated a little longer, everything would work out. It never does. Men like Drummond don't reward loyalty. They exploit it until there's nothing left to take. Garfield looked at her, and for the first time she saw something crack in his expression. Your father was a good man. I processed the seizure paperwork. I knew it was wrong, but You stayed silent because you were afraid, Nelly finished. I understand. Fear is powerful, but it's not powerful enough to protect you anymore. Right now you have one chance, to do the right thing. Testify about what Drummond made you do. Help us prove corruption. And in exchange, Whitmore will help you navigate the fallout. I can't guarantee immunity, Whitmore added, but I can argue for reduced charges based on cooperation. Your son might face consequences, but they'll be far less severe than criminal fraud charges. Garfield sat silent for a long time, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Then he said, What exactly do you need from me? Relief flooded through Nelly, so powerful it made her dizzy. Everything, Whitmore said. Every case Drummond influenced, every falsified report, every time he pressured you to manipulate legal proceedings. We need documentation, dates, evidence. Garfield nodded slowly. I kept records, copies of everything. I told myself it was for protection, but really, his voice broke. Really, I think I knew someday I'd need to prove I didn't do it willingly. Where are the records? Agnes asked. My home office, locked cabinet in the back. Garfield looked at Nelly. Miss Colton, I'm sorry. For what happened to your father, for the complaint, for all of it. I know, Nelly said quietly. Now, make it right. The documents arrived at Whitmore's office the next morning, delivered by Garfield himself in a sealed box. Inside were 3 years of carefully documented corruption, falsified assessments, manipulated debt proceedings, coerced testimonies. All of it tied directly to Drummond through dates, payments, and handwritten notes. It was more than enough. Whitmore began preparing countercharges immediately. Corruption of public office, malicious prosecution, harassment, fraud. He filed them with the territorial court, bypassing the local system Drummond had corrupted, and requested an immediate hearing. 2 days later, a federal marshal arrived at Drummond's estate with a summons. The news spread through Red Rock like wildfire. Nelly heard about it from Tommy, who'd heard it from Luther, who'd heard it in town while picking up feed. They're saying Drummond's finished, Tommy said, grinning, that the territorial court's going to throw him in prison. Don't get ahead of yourself, Luther cautioned. Rich men have ways of surviving even solid charges. Maybe, Gideon said, but even if he beats the charges, his reputation's damaged. People know now. They've seen proof. That's almost as powerful as a conviction. Nelly stood in the kitchen, listening to them talk, and felt something she hadn't felt in months. Not hope. She was still too cautious for that. But possibility. The possibility that doing the right thing might actually matter. that standing your ground might actually work, that fighting back might actually win. That night, after the crew had gone to the bunkhouse and the house had settled into quiet, Gideon found Nelly on the porch. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Too much thinking." He sat down beside her, and they watched the stars in comfortable silence for a while. Then he said, "You did good. What you did with Garfield, that took courage." "Didn't feel like courage. Felt like desperation." "Sometimes they're the same thing." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "You know this isn't over, right? Even if Drummond goes down, there'll be consequences. Legal battles, testimony, people taking sides." "I know. And you're still willing to see it through." "I don't have much choice." "You always have a choice, Nelly. You could leave. Start over somewhere Drummond's reach doesn't extend." Nelly turned to look at him. "Is that what you want?" "No." His voice was firm. "But I need to know it's what you want, to stay, to fight, to—" He stopped, searching for words. "To be part of this. Part of the ranch? Part of everything." Something in Nelly's chest pulled tight. "I'm not leaving, Gideon. Not unless you tell me to go." "I won't." "Then I'm staying." They sat together in the dark, and for the first time since her father died, Nelly felt something she hadn't expected to feel again. Safe. Not rescued. Not saved. Just safe. In a life she'd built with her own hands. The territorial court hearing was set for 3 weeks out, which meant 3 weeks of waiting while the entire county watched and whispered and chose sides. Nelly spent those weeks the same way she'd spent every week since arriving at Hart Ranch. Working. Bread didn't stop needing to be baked because legal battles were pending. Floors didn't clean themselves. Meals still required cooking, and men still required feeding. Work was the only thing that kept her sane. On the morning of the second week, she was peeling potatoes when Gideon appeared in the kitchen doorway, hat in hand. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Always." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Just—" He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable in a way she'd never seen before. "I need to talk to you about something. Something that's not about Drummond or legal proceedings or any of that." Nelly set down the knife and wiped her hands on her apron. "All right." Gideon came inside, closed the door, and stood there for a moment like he was trying to find words that kept slipping away from him. "I'm not good at this," he said finally. "Good at what?" "Talking. About things that matter." He took a breath. "When Sarah died, I told myself that part of my life was over, that I'd had my chance at happiness and lost it, and the best I could hope for was to keep the ranch running and not cause anyone else pain." Nelly's chest tightened, but she stayed quiet, letting him work through whatever he needed to say. "And then you showed up," Gideon continued, "and at first I thought you were just another employee, someone passing through. But you didn't pass through. You stayed, and you brought something back into this house that I thought was gone forever." "Gideon, let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "You brought life back, not just through cooking or cleaning, but through the way you care about things. The way you fought for this place when you had no reason to. The way you stood up to Drummond even though it put you at risk. The way you—" He stopped, searching for words. "The way you made me remember what it feels like to look forward to tomorrow instead of just surviving today." Nelly's throat was tight. "Where's this going?" "I want to court you." The words came out direct, honest, without decoration. "Not because I need a cook or a housekeeper. Not because the ranch needs someone to manage it, but because I—" He met her eyes. "Because I want to know if what I'm feeling is real, and if it is, I want to see where it goes." The kitchen felt too small suddenly, the air too thin. Nelly had imagined this moment in fragments over the past few weeks. Late at night, when she couldn't sleep, during quiet afternoons when Gideon would linger after meals to talk, in the way his eyes followed her across a room. But imagination was different from reality, and reality was standing in her kitchen looking at her with an expression that was equal parts hope and fear. "I need you to understand something," Nelly said slowly. "I'm not the kind of woman men court. I'm too big, too plain, too—" "Stop." Gideon's voice was sharp. "Don't do that. Don't tell me what you are or aren't based on what other people think. It's not just what they think, it's what I know. I've spent my whole life being too much of everything except the things that matter. You matter to me." Gideon moved closer. "Not despite who you are, but because of it. You're strong. You're honest. You don't break when things get hard. You dig in and push back. And yes, you're different from Sarah, different from any woman I've ever known, but that doesn't make you less. It makes you you. Nelly looked down at her hands, rough, scarred, the hands of someone who'd worked for everything they had. I can't be her. I don't want you to be her. Gideon's voice softened. I loved Sarah. I'll always love her. But she's gone, and I've spent 3 years pretending that meant I was gone too. You made me realize I'm still here, still alive, still capable of feeling something besides grief. And if it doesn't work, if you wake up 6 months from now and realize you made a mistake, then we deal with it like adults. But I don't think that's going to happen. He held out his hand. I'm asking for a chance, Nelly. Not a promise, not a commitment, just a chance to see if what we have is worth building on. Nelly stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Everything in her that had learned to expect disappointment screamed at her to say no, to protect herself, to not risk the fragile stability she'd built. But she'd walked 7 miles through killing heat for a chance. She'd stood up to Drummond for a chance. She'd rebuilt her entire life from nothing for a chance. This was just another kind of chance. She took his hand. Gideon's fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused and steady, and something in his expression relaxed. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet. You might regret this. I won't. You don't know that. No, Gideon agreed. But I'm willing to find out. News of the courtship spread faster than Nelly expected, probably because Tommy couldn't keep a secret to save his life, and because the ranch was too small for anything to stay private for long. Luther was the first to say something directly, catching Nelly in the garden 2 days later. So, he said, kneeling beside her to help pull weeds. You and Gideon. Me and Gideon. About time. Nelly looked at him, surprised. You're not going to warn me off? Tell me to be careful? Why would I do that? Because I'm... Nelly stopped, realizing she was about to repeat the same self-defeating words Gideon had told her to stop using. Because you're what? Luther's voice was gentle. Because you're a woman who's been through hell and come out stronger? Because you're the first person in 3 years to make this ranch feel like a home again? Nelly, if I thought you were bad for Gideon, I'd say so. But you're not. You're exactly what he needs. What if I'm not what he thinks I am? Then he'll figure it out and deal with it. But I don't think that's going to happen. Luther pulled a particularly stubborn weed and tossed it aside. You know what Sarah told me once? She said the secret to a good marriage isn't finding someone perfect. It's finding someone whose flaws you can live with and whose strengths make you better. You got strengths Gideon needs, and he's got patience you need. That's a decent foundation. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, but it's not impossible either. Luther stood, brushing dirt off his knees. Just don't overthink it. Take it one day at a time and see what happens. The territorial hearing arrived like a storm everyone knew was coming, but no one was fully prepared for. Whitmore had done his work well. The evidence was organized, the witnesses were prepared, and the charges were airtight. Garfield had provided documentation that connected Drummond to over a dozen cases of corruption spanning 3 years, including the seizure of Nelly's father's land. The hearing was held in the county courthouse, which was too small for the crowd that showed up. People packed the benches, lined the walls, spilled out into the hallway. It seemed like half of Red Rock had come to watch Drummond's empire crumble. Nelly sat in the front row beside Gideon, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. Across the aisle, Drummond sat with his own lawyer, a sharp-dressed man from Denver who looked like he charged more per hour than most people made in a month. When the judge called the proceedings to order, the room went silent. The prosecution laid out their case first, Whitmore speaking in clear, measured tones about corruption, manipulation, and abuse of power. He presented Garfield's documentation, testimony from Luther's cousin about the bar conversation, records from the Silver Horse about Matthew Garfield's debts, and finally, he called Nelly to the stand. Her legs felt unsteady as she walked to the witness box, but she forced them to hold. Whitmore's questions were straightforward. How had Drummond seized her father's land? What tactics had he used? What had she witnessed? Nelly answered each question directly, her voice steady even as memories of those 3 years pressed down on her chest. Then Drummond's lawyer stood for cross-examination. Miss Colton, he said smoothly, you've made some very serious accusations against my client, Accusations that, frankly, sound like the bitter complaints of someone who lost a legal dispute and refuses to accept responsibility. They're not complaints, Nelly said. They're facts. Are they? Or are they your interpretation of events colored by grief and resentment? They're what happened. What happened is that your father borrowed money he couldn't repay, made poor business decisions, and ultimately lost his property through legitimate legal channels. Isn't that correct? No. What happened is that your client manipulated contracts, inflated costs, and engineered my father's failure over 3 years. That's not legitimate. That's theft with paperwork. The lawyer's smile didn't waver. You're currently employed at Heart Ranch, correct? I am. And you're also engaged in a romantic relationship with the ranch's owner, Gideon Hart. Nelly's jaw tightened. Recording? Yes. How convenient. A woman who lost everything suddenly finds employment and romance with a wealthy rancher who's also in conflict with my client. One might say you have significant motivation to lie. One might say you're reaching, Nelly shot back. I started working at Heart Ranch before Drummond targeted it. My relationship with Gideon has nothing to do with what your client did to my father or to this ranch. Doesn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a very convenient narrative. Poor wronged woman, evil land baron, heroic rancher. Makes for a compelling story. Doesn't make it true. The documentation makes it true, Whitmore interjected. We have written records provided by a disgraced county assessor who's trying to save his own skin by throwing my client under the wagon, the lawyer countered. Garfield's testimony is worthless. He's facing corruption charges himself. Of course he's going to lie to reduce his sentence. The arguments went on for hours, back and forth, evidence and counter-evidence, testimony and objection. By the time the judge called for a recess, Nelly's head was pounding and her hands were shaking. Gideon found her outside on the courthouse steps. You did good in there, he said. Didn't feel good. Felt like getting torn apart. That's what they do. They try to make you doubt yourself, make you look unreliable. He took her hand, but the judge saw through it. I could tell. How? Because he kept asking Drummond's lawyer for documentation to counter ours, and the lawyer kept deflecting. That's not how innocent people defend themselves. When proceedings resumed after lunch, Garfield took the stand. He looked terrible, gray-faced, exhausted, like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. But his testimony was clear and damning. He walked through every case Drummond had influenced, every falsified report, every payoff. He provided dates, amounts, specific conversations. Drummond's lawyer tried to break him on cross-examination, but Garfield held firm. I'm not proud of what I did, Garfield said at one point. I let myself be used because I was afraid and desperate, but I'm done lying. Mr. Drummond used his money and influence to corrupt legal proceedings for his own profit. I helped him do it, and now I'm trying to make it right. When Garfield stepped down, the courtroom was buzzing. The judge called for closing arguments, then announced he would deliver his ruling in 3 days. Those 3 days were agony. Nelly tried to work, to stay busy, but her mind kept circling back to the hearing, to Drummond's cold eyes, to the lawyer's implications, to the possibility that despite all the evidence, despite all the testimony, the system might still protect the man with money and power. On the morning of the third day, they rode back to town to hear the verdict. The courthouse was packed again, tension thick enough to choke on. The judge entered, settled behind his bench, and looked out over the assembled crowd with an expression that gave nothing away. In the matter of the territorial court versus Silas Drummond, he began, this court has reviewed all evidence and testimony presented. The documentation provided by Thomas Garfield, corroborated by independent witnesses and financial records, demonstrates a pattern of corruption spanning multiple years and affecting numerous legal proceedings. Nelly's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear. Mr. Drummond's defense argued that Mr. Garfield's testimony should be disregarded due to his own culpability. However, the documentary evidence stands independent of Mr. Garfield's character. The court finds that Mr. Drummond did knowingly and deliberately manipulate legal proceedings through bribery and coercion. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge continued, Mr. Drummond is hereby found guilty of corruption of public office, malicious prosecution, and fraud. He is ordered to pay restitution to all affected parties, to be determined in subsequent proceedings. Additionally, this court is recommending criminal charges be filed at the federal level for violations of territorial law. The courtroom erupted. People were standing, talking, some cheering, some shouting objections. Drummond sat frozen, his face white with shock and rage. His lawyer was already gathering papers, preparing what would clearly be a long and expensive appeal process. But none of that mattered right now, because the judge had ruled against him. The system had worked, not perfectly, not without cost, but it had worked. Nelly felt Gideon's hand find hers, squeezing tight, and she squeezed back. Outside the courthouse, Agnes was waiting with a smile that was more vindication than joy. "Well," she said, "that's that." "Is it?" Nelly asked. "He'll appeal. He's got money for lawyers." "He does, but his reputation's destroyed. People know now. That's almost as valuable as the conviction." Agnes looked at Gideon. "The water rights issue will be dropped. I already spoke with the commission. With Garfield's testimony about how that complaint was manufactured, they're dismissing it entirely." "And the moral standards complaint?" Nelly asked. "Also dismissed, officially cleared from your record." Agnes's expression softened. "You're free, Nelly, both of you. It's over." It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like exhaustion. The ride back to Hart Ranch was quiet. Gideon drove while Nelly sat beside him, watching the landscape roll past and trying to process what had just happened. "You all right?" Gideon asked eventually. "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow." "Fair enough." They were almost home when Nelly said, "My father should have seen this. He should have known that fighting back was possible. He fought as hard as he could with what he had. It wasn't enough." "No," Gideon agreed. "But he taught you how to fight, and you finished what he started. That counts for something." Nelly thought about that for a long time. Her father had fought with honor in a system designed to reward dishonesty. He'd lost because he'd been alone, because he'd believed fairness would protect him, because he'd trusted that doing the right thing would be enough. She'd won because she'd learned from his mistakes, because she'd found allies, because she'd been willing to get her hands dirty in ways her father never would have. That didn't make her better than him. It just made her different. And maybe that was the point. Every generation had to learn its own way of surviving. Her father's way had been honor and patience. Hers was stubbornness and refusal to break. Both were valid. Both mattered. When they reached the ranch, the crew was waiting in the yard. Luther stood at the front, arms crossed, face carefully neutral. "Well?" he asked. "Guilty," Gideon said. "On all charges." Luther's expression cracked into something that might have been a smile if he knew how to smile properly. "Damn. Didn't think the system had it in them." "Neither did I," Nelly admitted. Tommy let out a whoop and punched the air. Marcus actually laughed, a sound Nelly had never heard from him before. Even Pete looked satisfied in his quiet way. That night, Nelly cooked a feast. Not because anyone asked her to, but because it was the only way she knew how to mark important moments. She made roast beef, mashed potatoes with real butter, green beans from the garden, fresh rolls, and a dried apple pie that used the last of their preserved fruit. The crew ate like men who'd been given permission to celebrate, and the dining room filled with laughter and stories, and the kind of easy comfort that only comes from people who've survived something difficult together. After the meal, after the dishes were done and the crew had drifted to the bunkhouse, Nelly found herself alone in the kitchen with Gideon. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For staying, for fighting, for—" He gestured around the kitchen. "For all of it. You gave me a job when I had nothing. This is the least I could do." "It's more than that." Gideon moved closer. "You could have left a dozen times. When Pete accused you, when Drummond showed up, when the rumors started. You stayed anyway. Why?" Nelly thought about the question, really thought about it. "Because I was tired of running, tired of letting other people decide what I was worth. I spent my whole life hearing I was too much, too big, too plain, too visible. And when I lost my father, I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I really was just too much of everything wrong. And now I think I was just in the wrong place." Nelly looked at him. "Here, I'm not too much. I'm just enough. The crew needs feeding. The house needs keeping. You need—" She stopped, suddenly uncertain. "I need you," Gideon finished. "Not because of what you do, because of who you are." The words settled into the space between them, simple and true and terrifying in their honesty. Nelly had spent so much of her life believing she was unlovable that hearing the opposite felt like standing on ground that kept shifting beneath her feet. But Gideon wasn't the kind of man who said things he didn't mean. If he said he needed her, he meant it. The question was whether she could believe it. "I'm not easy," she said. "I've got sharp edges and a temper, and I don't know how to be the kind of woman who makes things simple. I don't want simple. I want real." Gideon reached for her hand. "I've had easy. Easy is boring. Easy doesn't challenge you or make you better or remind you what it feels like to be alive. You do all of that. And if that comes with sharp edges and a temper, I'll take it." Nelly felt something crack open inside her chest. Not breaking, but opening. Like a door she'd kept locked for so long she'd forgotten it was there. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Me too." "What if I disappoint you? What if you don't?" Gideon squeezed her hand. "We can sit here listing all the ways this might fail, or we can take the chance and see what happens. Your choice." Nelly looked at their joined hands, his weathered and strong, hers scarred from years of work. They were both damaged people, both carrying losses they'd never fully recover from. But maybe that was okay. Maybe healing didn't mean forgetting. Maybe it just meant finding someone who understood that broken things could still be useful, still be valuable, still be worth keeping. "All right," she said, "let's see what happens." Gideon smiled, a real smile, full and genuine and so different from the distant expressions he'd worn when she first arrived that it made her breath catch. "Good," he said. The next few months unfolded like a season changing, gradual and inevitable and surprisingly gentle. Gideon courted her the way he did everything else, methodically, honestly, without pretense. He asked her to walk with him after supper. He brought her wildflowers from the far pasture. He sat with her in the kitchen while she worked and talked about things that mattered: his plans for the ranch, his memories of Sarah, his fears about the future. Nelly learned to accept his attention without questioning it. Learned that when he said he wanted to spend time with her, he meant it. Learned that she didn't have to earn affection through constant work or perfect behavior. She was allowed to just exist, and that was enough. The ranch changed too. With the legal threat gone and the crew's confidence restored, they started making improvements, fixing the barn roof, expanding the grazing land, building new fences. Hart Ranch was growing again, not just surviving, but thriving. Tommy started courting a girl from town, which meant Nelly got to watch him agonize over every conversation and offer advice she had no business giving considering her own inexperience. Luther's back hurt less now that he was eating better, and he'd started smiling more often, small, careful smiles, but real. Marcus remained quiet, but he'd begun staying after meals to help with dishes, a companionable silence that felt like friendship. And Pete, to everyone's surprise, had become the ranch's most vocal defender in town, shutting down gossip with the kind of sharp efficiency that came from guilt transformed into loyalty. 6 months after the hearing, on a warm spring evening when the sky was painted orange and gold, Gideon found Nelly in the garden. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Always." "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Nelly looked up from the tomato plants she was staking. "Next as in tomorrow, or next as in long term?" "Long term." She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "Sometimes." "Why?" Gideon was quiet for a moment, looking at the house behind them, solid and warm, with lamplight glowing in the windows. "When Sarah died, I thought the future died with her. Thought the best I could hope for was maintaining what we'd built. But that's not living, that's just existing. And now? Now I want to build something new, not instead of what we had, but alongside it." He turned to face her. "I want to expand the ranch, maybe add horses to the cattle operation, fix up the south pasture and plant crops. I want to make this place something that lasts beyond me." "Those are good plans." "They are. But I don't want to do it alone." Gideon took a breath. "Nelly, I'm asking you to marry me, not because I need a cook or a housekeeper or someone to help run the ranch, though you're exceptional at all of those things, but because I want to build a life with you, a real partnership. The kind where we make decisions together and face problems together and celebrate victories together." Nelly's heart was pounding. "Gideon, before you answer, I need you to understand something. This isn't about replacing Sarah. She was my first love, and I'll always carry her with me. But that doesn't mean there's no room for you. Love isn't finite. It doesn't run out. And what I feel for you is different from what I felt for her, but it's no less real." What do you feel for me? Nelly asked quietly. Respect, admiration, gratitude. Gideon moved closer. And love, the kind that grows slowly from friendship and partnership and shared struggle. The kind that's built on knowing someone's flaws and choosing them anyway. Nelly felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. I'm not going to be the kind of wife who makes everything easy. I know. I'm stubborn and opinionated, and I'll fight you when I think you're wrong. I'm counting on it, and I'm terrified that one day you'll wake up and realize you could have done better. Better than a woman who walked 7 miles through hell for a chance at a new life? Better than someone who stood up to the most powerful man in the county because it was the right thing to do? Better than the person who brought light back into a house that had been dark for 3 years? Gideon shook his head. Nelly, there is no better. There's just you, and you're exactly who I want. The tears spilled over and Nelly didn't bother wiping them away. Yes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Gideon's face broke into a smile so wide it looked like it hurt. He pulled her into a hug, careful at first, like he was afraid she'd break, then tighter when she hugged back just as fiercely. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the fading light, two broken people who'd found a way to be whole together. When they finally pulled apart, Nelly said, I need to tell you something. What? I love you too. I didn't say it before because I was afraid, but I do. I love you for seeing me when everyone else looked through me. I love you for giving me a chance when I had nothing. I love you for being patient with me while I figured out how to let someone in. And I love you for asking me to build a future instead of just offering me refuge. Gideon kissed her then, gentle and sure and full of promise. And Nelly kissed him back, letting herself believe finally that she deserved this. The wedding happened 6 weeks later, simple and small, in the main room of Hart Ranch, with the crew as witnesses and Agnes as matron of honor. There was no church, no crowd, no elaborate ceremony, just two people making promises they intended to keep, surrounded by the people who'd helped them survive. Nelly wore a simple blue dress that Agnes had helped her sew, and Gideon wore his best suit. Luther stood beside Gideon as best man, trying not to look emotional and failing. Tommy cried openly, which made Marcus uncomfortable and Pete smirk. And when the traveling judge pronounced them married, the room erupted in cheers and congratulations. That night, after the crew had celebrated with cake and whiskey and had finally retreated to give them privacy, Nelly and Gideon sat together on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. You know what I realized today? Nelly said. What? I spent my whole life thinking home was a place, the house I grew up in, the land my father worked. And when I lost that, I thought I'd lost home forever. And now? Now I know home isn't a place. It's people. It's work that matters. It's waking up and knowing you belong. Nelly looked at him. It's this, right here. Built from nothing but determination and stubbornness and a refusal to give up. Gideon took her hand. Sarah used to say something similar. She said home is wherever you're willing to fight for. She was right. She was. He squeezed her hand. And I think she'd be glad you're here. Glad the house is full again. Glad I stopped just surviving and started living. They sat in comfortable silence, and Nelly thought about the 7-mile walk that had brought her here. About the desperate woman with nothing but a flour sack and failing hope. About every choice she'd made since. To work instead of quit, to fight instead of flee, to stand her ground instead of disappearing. No one had rescued her. No miracle had saved her. She'd done it herself, one stubborn step at a time, and that mattered more than any fairy tale ending ever could. Because the truth was this: life didn't reward perfection. It rewarded persistence. It rewarded the people who got knocked down and stood back up, who lost everything and built again, who refused to let circumstances define their worth. Nelly. May Colton had been told her entire life that she was too much, too big, too visible, too stubborn to ever fit anywhere properly. Turns out she just needed to find a place that appreciated stubborn, a place where too much became just enough, a place where broken people could heal not by forgetting their scars, but by building something strong enough to hold them. Hart Ranch was that place. And she was finally home,